Section 46 of the Letters of Mark Twain complete. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. The Letters of Mark Twain complete. By Mark Twain. Volume 5, Chapter 44. Letters of 1905. To Twichell, Mr. Duneka, and others. Politics and Humanity. A Summer at Dublin. Mark Twain at 70. In 1884, Mark Twain had abandoned the Republican Party to vote for Cleveland. He believed the party had become corrupt, and to his last day it was hard for him to see anything good in Republican policies or performance. He was a personal friend of Theodore Roosevelt's, but, as we have seen in a former letter, Roosevelt the politician rarely found favor in his eyes. With or without justification, most of the President's political acts invited his caustic sarcasm and unsparing condemnation. Another letter to Twichell of this time affords a fair example. To Rev. J. H. Twichell, in Hartford, February 16, '05. Dear Joe, I knew I had in me somewhere a definite feeling about the President if I could only find the words to define it with. Here they are. To a hair, from Leonard Jerome. For 20 years I have loved Roosevelt the man and hated Roosevelt the statesman and politician. It's mighty good. Every time in 25 years that I have met Roosevelt the man, a wave of welcome has streaked through me with the hand grip. But whenever, as a rule, I meet Roosevelt the statesman and politician, I find him destitute of morals and not respect-worthy. It is plain that where his political self and his party self are concerned, he has nothing resembling a conscience, that under those inspirations he is naively indifferent to the restraints of duty and even unaware of them, ready to kick the Constitution into the backyard whenever it gets in the way, and whenever he smells a vote, not only willing but eager to buy it, give extravagant rates for it, and pay the bill not out of his own pocket or the party's, but out of the nation's by cold pillage, as per Order 78 and the appropriation of the Indian Trust Funds. But Roosevelt is excusable. I recognize it and ought to concede it. We are all insane, each in his own way, and with insanity goes irresponsibility. Theodore the man is sane. In fairness, we ought to keep in mind that Theodore, as statesman and politician, is insane and irresponsible. Do not throw these enlightenments aside, but study them. Let them raise you to higher planes and make you better. You taught me in my callow days. Let me pay back the debt now in my old age, out of a thesaurus with wisdom smelted from the golden ores of experience. Ever yours, for sweetness and light, Mark. The next letter to Twichell takes up politics and humanity in general, in a manner complementary to neither. Mark Twain was never really a pessimist, but he had pessimistic intervals, such as come to most of us in life's later years, and at such times he let himself go without stint concerning the damned human race, as he called it, usually with a manifest sense of indignation that he should be a member of it. In much of his later writing, A Mysterious Stranger, for example, he said his say with but small restraint, and certainly in his purely intellectual moments he was likely to be a pessimist of the most extreme type, capably damning the race and the inventor of it. Yet at heart no man loved his kind more genuinely or with deeper compassion than Mark Twain, perhaps for its very weaknesses. It was only that he had intervals, frequent intervals and rather long ones, when he did not admire it and was still more doubtful as to the ways of Providence. To Rev. J. H. Twichell, in Hartford: March 14, '05. Dear Joe, I have a pudding-head maxim. When a man is a pessimist before 48, he knows too much. If he is an optimist after it, he knows too little. It is with contentment, therefore, that I reflect that I am better and wiser than you. Joe, you seem to be dealing in bulks now. The bulk of the farmers and U.S. Senators are honest. As regards purchase and sale with money, who doubts it? Is that the only measure of honesty? Aren't there a dozen kinds of honesty which can't be measured by the money standard? Treason is treason, and there's more than one form of it. The money form is but one of them. When a person is disloyal to any confessed duty, he is plainly and simply dishonest, and knows it and is privately troubled about it and not proud of himself. Judged by this standard, and who would challenge the validity of it, there isn't an honest man in Connecticut, nor in the Senate, nor anywhere else. I do not even except myself this time. Am I finding fault with you and the rest of the populace? No, I assure you I am not. For I know the human race's limitations, and this makes it my duty, my pleasant duty, to be fair to it. Each person in it is honest in one or several ways, but no member of it is honest in all the ways required by what? By his own standard. Outside of that, as I look at it, there is no obligation upon him. Am I honest? I give you my word of honor. Private. I am not. For 7 years I have suppressed a book which my conscience tells me I ought to publish. I hold it a duty to publish it. There are other difficult duties which I am equal to, but I am not equal to that one. Yes, even I am dishonest. Not in many ways, but in some. 41, I think it is. We are certainly all honest in one or several ways, every man in the world, though I have reason to think I'm the only one whose blacklist runs so light. Sometimes I feel lonely enough in this lofty solitude. Yes, oh yes, I'm not overlooking the steady progress from age to age of the coming of the kingdom of God and righteousness. From age to age, yes, it describes that giddy gait. I and the rocks will not live to see it arrive, but that is all right. It will arrive, it surely will. But you ought not to be always ironically apologizing for the deity. If that thing is going to arrive, it is inferable that he wants it to arrive, and so it is not quite kind to you, and it hurts me to see you flinging sarcasms at the gate of it. And yet it would not be fair in me not to admit that the sarcasms are deserved. When the deity wants a thing, and after working at it for ages and ages, can't show even a shade of progress toward its accomplishment, we don't laugh, but it is only because we dasn't. The source of righteousness is in the heart? Yes. And engineered and directed by the brain? Yes. Well, history and tradition testify that the heart is just about what it was in the beginning. It has undergone no shade of change. Its good and evil impulses and their consequences are the same today that they were in old Bible times, in Egyptian times, in Greek times, in Middle Age times, in 20th century times. There has been no change. Meantime, the brain has undergone no change. It is what it always was. There are a few good brains and a multitude of poor ones. It was so in old Bible times and in all other times, Greek, Roman, Middle Ages, and 20th century. Among the savages, all the savages, the average brain is as competent as the average brain here or elsewhere. I will prove it to you sometime if you like. And there are great brains among them too. I will prove that also, if you like. Well, the 19th century made progress, the first progress after ages and ages, colossal progress. In what? Materialities. Prodigious acquisitions were made in things which add to the comfort of many and make life harder for as many more. But the addition to righteousness? Is that discoverable? I think not. The materialities were not invented in the interest of righteousness. That there is more righteousness in the world because of them than there was before is hardly demonstrable, I think. In Europe and America there is a vast change due to them in ideals. Do you admire it? All Europe and all America are feverishly scrambling for money. Money is the supreme ideal. All others take 10th place with the great bulk of the nations named. Money lust has always existed, but not in the history of the world was it ever a craze, a madness, until your time and mine. This lust has rotted these nations. It has made them hard, sordid, ungentle, dishonest, oppressive. Did England rise against the infamy of the Boer War? No. Rose in favor of it. Did America rise against the infamy of the Philippine War? No. Rose in favor of it. Did Russia rise against the infamy of the present war? No. Sat still and said nothing. Has the kingdom of God advanced in Russia since the beginning of time? Or in Europe and America, considering the vast backward step of the money lust? Or anywhere else? If there has been any progress toward righteousness since the early days of creation, which in my ineradicable honesty I am obliged to doubt, I think we must confine it to 10% of the populations of Christendom, but leaving Russia, Spain, and South America entirely out. This gives us 320,000,000 to draw the 10% from. That is to say, 32,000,000 have advanced toward righteousness in the kingdom of God since the ages and ages have been flying along, the deity sitting up there admiring. Well, you see, it leaves 1,200,000,000 out of the race. They stand just where they have always stood. There has been no change. N.B. No charge for these informations. Do come down soon, Joe. With love, Mark. St. Clair McElway of the Brooklyn Eagle narrowly escaped injuries in a railway accident and received the following. Clemens and McElway were old friends. To St. Clair McElway in Brooklyn, 21 Fifth Avenue, Sunday morning, April 30, 1905. Dear McElway, your innumerable friends are grateful, most grateful. As I understand the telegrams, the engineer of your train had never seen a locomotive before. Very well, then. I am once more glad that there is an ever watchful Providence to foresee possible results and send Ogdens and McIntyres along to save our friends. The government's official report, showing that our railways killed 1,200 persons last year and injured 60,000, convinces me that under present conditions one Providence is not enough to properly and efficiently take care of our railroad business. But it is characteristically American, always trying to get along short handed and save wages. I am helping your family congratulate themselves, and am your friend as always, S. L. Clemens. Clemens did not spend any more summers at Quarry Farm. All its associations were beautiful and tender, but they could only sadden him. The life there had been as of another world, sunlit, idyllic, now forever vanished. For the summer of 1905 he leased the Copley greenhouse at Dublin, New Hampshire, where there was a Boston colony of writing and artistic folk, including many of his longtime friends. Among them was Colonel Thomas Wentworth Higginson, who wrote a hearty letter of welcome when he heard the news. Clemens replied in kind. To Colonel Thomas Wentworth Higginson, in Boston, 21 Fifth Avenue, Sunday, March 26, 1905. Dear Colonel Higginson, I early learned that you would be my neighbor in the summer, and I rejoiced, recognizing in you and your family a large asset. I hope for frequent intercourse between the two households. I shall have my youngest daughter with me. The other one will go from the rest cure in this city to the rest cure in Norfolk, Connecticut, and we shall not see her before autumn. We have not seen her since the middle of October. Jean, the youngest daughter, went to Dublin and saw the house and came back charmed with it. I know the Thayers of old. Manifestly there is no lack of attractions up there. Mrs. Thayer and I were shipmates in a wild excursion perilously near 40 years ago. You say you send with this the story. Then it should be here, but it isn't. When I send a thing with another thing, the other thing goes but the thing doesn't. I find it later, still on the premises. Will you look it up now and send it? Aldrich was here half an hour ago, like a breeze from over the fields, with the fragrance still upon his spirit. I am tired of waiting for that man to get old. Sincerely yours, S. L. C. Mark Twain was in his 70th year, old neither in mind nor body, but willing to take life more quietly, to refrain from travel and gay events. A sort of pioneers' reunion was to be held on the Pacific coast, and a letter from Robert Fulton, of Reno, Nevada, invited Clemens to attend. He did not go, but he sent a letter that we may believe was the next best thing to those who heard it read. To Robert Fulton, in Reno, Nevada, in the mountains, May 24, 1905. Dear Mr. Fulton, I remember, as if it were yesterday, that when I disembarked from the overland stage in front of the Ormsby in Carson City in August, 1861, I was not expecting to be asked to come again. I was tired, discouraged, white with alkali dust, and did not know anybody. And if you had said then, cheer up, desolate stranger, don't be downhearted, pass on, and come again in 1905, you cannot think how grateful I would have been and how gladly I would have closed the contract. Although I was not expecting to be invited, I was watching out for it, and was hurt and disappointed when you started to ask me and changed it to, how soon are you going away? But you have made it all right now. The wound is closed, and so I thank you sincerely for the invitation, and with you all Reno, and if I were a few years younger I would accept it, and promptly. I would go. I would let somebody else do the oration, but as for me, I would talk, just talk. I would renew my youth, and talk, and talk, and talk, and have the time of my life. I would march the unforgotten and unforgettable antiques by, and name their names, and give them reverent hail and farewell as they passed. Goodman, McCarthy, Gillis, Curry, Baldwin, Winters, Howard, Nye, Stewart, Neely Johnson, Hal Clayton, North, Root, and my brother, upon whom be peace, and then the desperadoes who made life a joy and the slaughterhouse a precious possession: Sam Brown, Farmer Pete, Bill Mayfield, Six Finger Jake, Jack Williams, and the rest of the Crimson Discipleship, and so on and so on. Believe me, I would start a resurrection it would do you more good to look at than the next one will, if you go on the way you are doing now. Those were the days, those old ones. They will come no more. Youth will come no more. They were so full to the brim with the wine of life. There have been no others like them. It chokes me up to think of them. Would you like me to come out there and cry? It would not beseem my white head. Good-bye. I drink to you all. Have a good time, and take an old man's blessing. Mark Twain. A few days later he was writing to H. H. Bancroft of San Francisco, who had invited him to a visit in event of his coming to the coast. Henry James had just been there for a week, and it was hoped that Howells would soon follow. To H. H. Bancroft, in San Francisco, up in New Hampshire, May 27, 1905. Dear Mr. Bancroft, I thank you sincerely for the tempting hospitalities which you offer me, but I have to deny myself, for my wandering days are over, and it is my desire and purpose to sit by the fire the rest of my remnant of life, and indulge myself with the pleasure and repose of work uninterrupted and unmarred by duties or excursions. A man who, like me, is going to strike 70 on the 30th of next November has no business to be flitting around the way Howells does, that shameless old fictitious butterfly. But if it comes, don't tell him I said it, for it would hurt him, and I wouldn't brush a flake of powder from his wing for anything. I only say it in envy of his indestructible youth, anyway. Howells will be 88 in October. With thanks again. Sincerely yours, S.L.C. Clemens found that the air of the New Hampshire hills agreed with him and stimulated him to work. He began an entirely new version of The Mysterious Stranger, of which he already had a bulky and nearly finished manuscript written in Vienna. He wrote several hundred pages of an extravaganza entitled 3,000 Years Among the Microbes, and then, having got his superabundant vitality reduced, it was likely to expend itself in these weird mental exploits, he settled down one day and wrote that really tender and beautiful idyll, Eve's Diary, which he had begun, or at least planned, the previous summer at Tyringham. In a letter to Mr. Frederick A. Duneka, general manager of Harper & Brothers, he tells something of the manner of the story, also his revised opinion of Adam's Diary, written in '93, and originally published as a souvenir of Niagara Falls. To Frederick A. Duneka, in New York: Dublin, July 16, '05. Dear Mr. Duneka, I wrote Eve's Diary, she using Adam's Diary as her unwitting and unconscious text, of course, since to use any other text would have been an imbecility. Then I took Adam's Diary and read it. It turned my stomach. It was not literature, yet it had been literature once, before I sold it to be degraded to an advertisement of the Buffalo Fair. I was going to write and ask you to melt the plates and put it out of print. But this morning I examined it without temper, and saw that if I abolished the advertisement it would be literature again. So I have done it. I have struck out 700 words and inserted 5 manuscript pages of new matter, 650 words, and now Adam's Diary is damn good. 60 times as good as it ever was before. I believe it is as good as Eve's Diary now. No, it's not quite that good, I guess, but it is good enough to go in the same cover with Eve's, I'm sure of that. I hate to have the old Adam go out any more. Don't put it on the presses again. Let's put the new one in place of it, and next Christmas let us bind Adam and Eve in one cover. They score points against each other, so if not bound together, some of the points would not be perceived. P.S. Please send another Adam's Diary, so that I can make 2 revised copies. Eve's Diary is Eve's love story, but we will not name it that. Yours ever, Mark. The peacemaking at Portsmouth between Japan and Russia was not satisfactory to Mark Twain, who had fondly hoped there would be no peace until, as he said, Russian liberty was safe. One more battle would have abolished the waiting chains of millions upon millions of unborn Russians, and I wish it could have been fought. He set down an expression of his feelings for the Associated Press, and it invited many letters. Charles Francis Adams wrote, "It attracted my attention because it so exactly expresses the views I have myself all along entertained." Clemens was invited by Colonel George Harvey to dine with the Russian emissaries Baron Rosen and Sergius Witt. He declined, but his telegram so pleased Witt that he asked permission to publish it, and announced that he would show it to the Czar. Telegram to Colonel George Harvey in New York. To Colonel Harvey: I am still a cripple. Otherwise I should be more than glad of this opportunity to meet the illustrious magicians who came here equipped with nothing but a pen, and with it have divided the honors of the war with the sword. It is fair to presume that in 30 centuries history will not get done admiring these men who attempted what the world regarded as impossible and achieved it. Witt would not have cared to show the Czar the telegram in its original form, which follows: Telegram (unsent) to Colonel George Harvey in New York. To Colonel Harvey: I am still a cripple. Otherwise I should be more than glad of this opportunity to meet those illustrious magicians who with the pen have annulled, obliterated, and abolished every high achievement of the Japanese sword, and turned the tragedy of a tremendous war into a gay and blithesome comedy. If I may, let me, in all respect and honor, salute them as my fellow humorists, I taking 3rd place, as becomes one who was not born to modesty, but by diligence and hard work is acquiring it. Mark. Nor still another unsent form, perhaps more characteristic than either of the foregoing. Telegram (unsent) to Colonel George Harvey in New York. Dear Colonel, no, this is a love feast. When you call a larger sorrow, send for me. Mark. To Mrs. Crane, Quarry Farm, Dublin, September 24, '05. Susie dear, I have had a lovely dream. Livy, dressed in black, was sitting up in my bed here at my right, and looking as young and sweet as she used to do when she was in health. She said, "What is the name of your sweet sister?" I said, "Pamela." "Oh, yes, that is it. I thought it was," naming a name which has escaped me. "Won't you write it down for me?" I reached eagerly for a pen and pad, laid my hands upon both, then said to myself, "It is only a dream," and turned back sorrowfully, and there she was still. The conviction flamed through me that our lamented disaster was a dream, and this a reality. I said, "How blessed it is, how blessed it is! It was all a dream, only a dream." She only smiled and did not ask what dream I meant, which surprised me. She leaned her head against mine, and I kept saying I was perfectly sure it was a dream. I never would have believed it wasn't. I think she said several things, but if so, they are gone from my memory. I woke and did not know I had been dreaming. She was gone. I wondered how she could go without my knowing it. But I did not spend any thought upon that. I was too busy thinking of how vivid and real was the dream, that we had lost her, and how unspeakably blessed it was to find that it was not true, and that she was still ours and with us. S.L.C. One day that summer Mark Twain received a letter from the actress Minnie Maddern Fiske, asking him to write something that would aid her in her crusade against bullfighting. The idea appealed to him. He replied at once. To Mrs. Fiske. Dear Mrs. Fiske, I shall certainly write the story, but I may not get it to suit me, in which case it will go in the fire. Later I will try again, and yet again, and again. I am used to this. It has taken me 12 years to write a short story, the shortest one I ever wrote, I think. Footnote. Probably the death disc. End of footnote. So, do not be discouraged. I will stick to this one in the same way. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. He did not delay in his beginning, and a few weeks later was sending word to his publisher about it. To Frederick A. Duneka, in New York, October 2, '05. Dear Mr. Duneka, I have just finished a short story which I greatly admire, and you will too. A Horse's Tale, about 15,000 words, at a rough guess. It has good fun in it, and several characters, and is lively. I shall finish revising it in a few days or more. Then Jean will type it. Don't you think you can get it into the January and February numbers and issue it as a dollar booklet just after the middle of January, when you issue the February numbers? It ought to be ably illustrated. Why not sell simultaneous rights for this one to the Ladies' Home Journal, or Collier's, or both, and recoup yourself? For I would like to get it to classes that can't afford Harper's. Although it doesn't preach, there's a sermon concealed in it. Yours sincerely, Mark. 5 days later he added some rather interesting facts concerning the new story. To F. A. Duneka, in New York, October 7, 1905. Dear Mr. Duneka, I've made a poor guess as to number of words. I think there must be 20,000. My usual page of manuscript contains about 130 words, but when I am deeply interested in my work and dead to everything else, my handwriting shrinks, and shrinks until there's a great deal more than 130 on a page. Oh, yes, a deal more. Well, I discovered this morning that this tale is written in that small hand. This strong interest is natural, for the heroine is my daughter Susie, whom we lost. It was not intentional. It was a good while before I found it out. So I am sending you her picture to use, and to reproduce with photographic exactness the unsurpassable expression and all. May you find an artist who has lost an idol. Take as good care of the picture as you can, and restore it to me when I come. I hope you will illustrate this tale considerably. Not humorous pictures, no. When they are good or bad, one's humor gets no chance to play surprises on the reader. A humorous subject, illustrated seriously, is all right, but a humorous artist is no fit person for such work. You see, a humorous writer pretends to absolute seriousness when he knows his trade. Then for an artist to step in and give his calculated gravity all away with a funny picture, oh my land! It gives me the dry gripes just to think of it. It would be just about up to the average comic artist's intellectual level to make a funny picture of the horse kicking the lungs out of a trader. Hang it, the remark is funny, because the horse is not aware of it, but the fact is not humorous. It is tragic, and it is no subject for a humorous picture. Could I be allowed to sit in judgment upon the pictures before they are accepted? At least those in which Cathy may figure. This is not essential. It is but a suggestion, and it is hereby withdrawn if it would be troublesome or cause delay. I hope you will reproduce the cat pile, full page, and save the photo for me in as good condition as possible. When Susie and Clara were little tots, those cats had their profoundest worship, and there is no duplicate of this picture. These cats all had thundering names, or inappropriate ones, furnished by the children with my help. One was named Buffalo Bill. Are you interested in coincidences? After discovering about the middle of the book that Cathy was Susie Clemens, I put a picture with my manuscript to be reproduced. After the book was finished, it was discovered that Susie had a dim model, a soldier boy, in her arms. I had forgotten all about that toy. Then I examined the cat picture and laid it with the manuscript for introduction. But it was not until yesterday that I remembered that one of the cats was named Buffalo Bill. Sincerely yours, Mark. The reference in this letter to shrinkage of his handwriting with the increasing intensity of his interest, and the consequent addition of the number of words to the page, recalls another fact noted by Mr. Duneka, viz., that because of his terse Anglo-Saxon diction, Mark Twain could put more words on a magazine page than any other writer. It is hardly necessary to add that he got more force into what he put on the page for the same reason. There was always a run of reporters at Mark Twain's New York home. His opinion was sought for on every matter of public interest, and whatever happened to him in particular was considered good for at least half a column of copy, with his name as a catch-line at the top. When it was learned that he was to spend the summer in New Hampshire, the reporters had all wanted to find out about it. Now that the summer was ending, they began to want to know how he had liked it, what work he had done, and what were his plans for another year. As they frequently applied to his publishers for these details, it was finally suggested to him that he write a letter furnishing the required information. His reply, handed to Mr. Duneka, who was visiting him at the moment, is full of interest. Memo to Mr. Duneka, Dublin, October 9, 1905. As to the other matters, here are the details. Yes, I've tried a number of summer homes, here and in Europe together. Each of these homes had charms of its own, charms and delights of its own, and some of them, even in Europe, had comforts. Several of them had conveniences, too. They all had a view. It is my conviction that there should always be some water in a view, a lake or a river, but not the ocean, if you are down on its level. I think that when you are down on its level, it seldom inflames you with an ecstasy which you could not get out of a sand flat. It is like being on board ship over again. Indeed, it is worse than that, for there's 3 months of it. On board ship, one tires of the aspects in a couple of days and quits looking. The same vast circle of heaving humps is spread around you all the time, with you in the center of it and never gaining an inch on the horizon, so far as you can see. For variety, a flight of flying fish, mornings. A flock of porpoises throwing somersaults, afternoons. A remote whale spouting, Sundays. Occasional phosphorescent effects, nights. Every other day, a streak of black smoke trailing along under the horizon. on the one single red letter day, the illustrious iceberg. I have seen that iceberg 34 times in 37 voyages. It is always the same shape. It is always the same size. It always throws up the same old flash when the sun strikes it. You may set it on any New York doorstep of a June morning and light it up with a mirror flash, and I will engage to recognize it. It is artificial, and it is provided and anchored out by the steamer companies. I used to like the sea, but I was young then and could easily get excited over any kind of monotony and keep it up till the monotonies ran out, if it was a fortnight. Last January, when we were beginning to inquire about a home for this summer, I remembered that Albert Thayer had said, 3 years before, that the New Hampshire Highlands was a good place. He was right. It was a good place. Any place that is good for an artist in paint is good for an artist in morals and ink. Brush is here, too. So is Colonel T. W. Higginson. So is Raphael Pumpelly. So is Mr. Secretary Hitchcock. So is Henderson. So is Learned. So is Summer. So is Franklin McVeigh. So is Joseph L. Smith. So is Henry Copley Green when I'm not occupying his house, which I'm doing this season. Paint, literature, science, statesmanship, history, professorship, law, morals, these are all represented here, yet crime is substantially unknown. The summer homes of these refugees are sprinkled, a mile apart, among the forest-clad hills, with access to each other by firm smooth country roads which are so embowered in dense foliage that it is always twilight in there and comfortable. The forests are spider-webbed with these good roads. They go everywhere. But for the help of the guide boards the stranger would not arrive anywhere. The village Dublin is bunched together in its own place, but a good telephone service makes its markets handy to all those outliers. I have spelt it that way to be witty. The village executes orders on the Boston plan, promptness and courtesy. The summer homes are high perched, as a rule, and have contenting outlooks. The house we occupy has one. Monadnock, a soaring double hump, rises into the sky at its left elbow. That is to say, it is close at hand. From the base of the long slant of the mountain the valley spreads away to the circling frame of the hills, and beyond the frame the billowy sweep of remote great ranges rises to view and flows, fold upon fold, wave upon wave, soft and blue and unworldly, to the horizon 50 miles away. In these October days Monadnock and the valley and its framing hills make an inspiring picture to look at, for they are sumptuously splashed and mottled and betorched from skyline to skyline with the richest dyes the autumn can furnish, and when they lie flaming in the full drench of the mid-afternoon sun the sight affects the spectator physically. It stirs his blood like military music. These summer homes are commodious, well built and well furnished, facts which sufficiently indicate that the owners built them to live in themselves. They have furnaces and wood fireplaces and the rest of the comforts and conveniences of a city home, and can be comfortably occupied all the year round. We cannot have this house next season, but I have secured Mrs. Upton's house, which is over in the Law and Science quarter, 2 or 3 miles from here, and about the same distance from the art, literary, and scholastic groups. The Science and Law quarter has needed improving this good while. The nearest railway station is distant something like an hour's drive. It is 3 hours from there to Boston, over a branch line. You can go to New York in 6 hours per branch lines if you change cars every time you think of it. but it is better to go to Boston and stop over and take the trunk line next day. Then you do not get lost. It is claimed that the atmosphere of the New Hampshire highlands is exceptionally bracing and stimulating, and a fine aid to hard and continuous work. It is a just claim, I think. I came in May and wrote 35 successive days without a break. It is possible that I could not have done it elsewhere. I do not know. I have not had any disposition to try it before. I think I got the disposition out of the atmosphere this time. I feel quite sure, in fact, that that is where it came from. I am ashamed to confess what an intolerable pile of manuscript I ground out in the 35 days. Therefore I will keep the number of words to myself. I wrote the first half of a long tale, The Adventures of a Microbe, and put it away for a finish next summer, and started another long tale, The Mysterious Stranger. I wrote the first half of it and put it with the other for a finish next summer. I stopped then. I was not tired, but I had no books on hand that needed finishing this year except one that was 7 years old. After a little I took that one up and finished it, not for publication, but to have it ready for revision next summer. Since I stopped work I have had a 2 months' holiday. The summer has been my working time for 35 years. To have a holiday in it, in America, is new for me. I have not broken it, except to write Eve's Diary and A Horse's Tale, short things occupying the mill 12 days. This year our summer is 6 months long and ends with November and the flight home to New York, but next year we hope and expect to stretch it another month and end it the 1st of December. No signature. The fact that he was a persistent smoker was widely known, and many friends and admirers of Mark Twain sent him cigars, most of which he could not use because they were too good. He did not care for Havana cigars, but smoked the fragrant, inexpensive domestic tobacco with plenty of pep in it, as we say today. Now and then he had an opportunity to head off some liberal friend who wrote asking permission to contribute to his cigar collection, as instanced the following: To Rev. L. M. Powers, in Haverhill, Massachusetts, November 9, 1905. Dear Mr. Powers, I should accept your hospitable offer at once, but for the fact I couldn't do it and remain honest. That is to say, if I allowed you to send me what you believe to be good cigars, it would distinctly mean that I meant to smoke them, whereas I should do nothing of the kind. I know a good cigar better than you do, for I've had 60 years' experience. No, that is not what I mean. I mean I know a bad cigar better than anybody else. I judge by the price only. If it costs above 5 cents, I know it to be either foreign or half foreign and unsmokable. By me, I have many boxes of Havana cigars, of all prices, from 20 cents apiece up to $1.66 apiece. I bought none of them. They were all presents. They are an accumulation of several years. I have never smoked one of them, and never shall. I work them off on the visitor. You shall have a chance when you come. Pessimists are born, not made. Optimists are born, not made. But no man is born either pessimist wholly or optimist wholly, perhaps. He is pessimistic along certain lines and optimistic along certain others. That is my case. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. In spite of all the fine photographs that were made of him, there recurred constantly among those sent him to be autographed a print of one which, years before, Sarony had made and placed on public sale. It was a good photograph, mechanically and even artistically, but it did not please Mark Twain. Whenever he saw it, he recalled Sarony with bitterness and severity. Once he received an inquiry concerning it, and thus feelingly expressed himself: To Mr. Roe, no address, 21 Fifth Avenue, New York, November 14, 1905. Dear Mr. Roe, that alleged portrait has a private history. Sarony was as much of an enthusiast about wild animals as he was about photography, and when Du Chaillu brought the first gorilla to this country in 1819, he came to me in a fever of excitement and asked me if my father was of record and authentic. I said he was. Then Sarony, without any abatement of his excitement, asked if my grandfather also was of record and authentic. I said he was. Then Sarony, with still rising excitement and with joy added to it, said he had found my great-grandfather in the person of the gorilla, and had recognized him at once by his resemblance to me. I was deeply hurt, but did not reveal this, because I knew Sarony meant no offense, for the gorilla had not done him any harm, and he was not a man who would say an unkind thing about a gorilla wantonly. I went with him to inspect the ancestor, and examined him from several points of view, without being able to detect anything more than a passing resemblance. Wait, said Sarony with confidence, let me show you. He borrowed my overcoat and put it on the gorilla. The result was surprising. I saw that the gorilla, while not looking distinctly like me, was exactly what my great-grandfather would have looked like if I had had one. Sarony photographed the creature in that overcoat and spread the picture about the world. It has remained spread about the world ever since. It turns up every week in some newspaper somewhere or other. It is not my favorite, but to my exasperation it is everybody else's. Do you think you could get it suppressed for me? I will pay the limit. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. The year 1905 closed triumphantly for Mark Twain. The great 70th birthday dinner, planned by Colonel George Harvey, is remembered today as the most notable festival occasion in New York literary history. Other dinners and ovations followed. At 70 he had returned to the world more beloved, more honored than ever before. End of section 46. Recording by James K. White. Chula Vista. Section 47 of the Letters of Mark Twain complete. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. The Letters of Mark Twain complete, by Mark Twain. Volume 5, Chapter 45. Letters 1906 to Various Persons. The Farewell Lecture. A Second Summer in Dublin. Billiards and Copyright. Mark Twain, at Pier 70, as he called it, paused to look backward and to record some memoirs of his long, eventful past. The autobiography dictations, begun in Florence, were resumed, and daily he traveled back, recalling long-ago scenes and all but forgotten places. He was not without reminders. Now and again there came some message that brought back the old days, the Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn days, or the romance of the river that he never recalled other than with tenderness and a tone of regret that it was gone. An invitation to the golden wedding of two ancient friends moved and saddened him, and his answer to it conveys about all the story of life. To Mr. and Mrs. Gordon, 21 Fifth Avenue, January 24, '06. Dear Gordons, I have just received your golden wedding at home, and am trying to adjust my focus to it and realize how much it means. It is inconceivable. With a simple sweep it carries me back over a stretch of time measurable only in astronomical terms and geological periods. It brings before me Mrs. Gordon, young, round-limbed, handsome. And with her the Youngbloods and their 2 babies, and Laura Wright, that unspoiled little maid, that fresh flower of the woods and the prairies, 48 years ago. Life was a fairy tale then. It is a tragedy now. When I was 43 and John Hay 41, he said life was a tragedy after 40, and I disputed it. 3 years ago he asked me to testify again. I counted my graves, and there was nothing for me to say. I am old, I recognize it, but I don't realize it. I wonder if a person ever really ceases to feel young. I mean, for a whole day at a time. My love to you both and to all of us that are left. Mark. Though he used very little liquor of any kind, it was Mark Twain's custom to keep a bottle of Scotch whiskey with his collection of pipes and cigars and tobacco on a little table by his bedside. During restless nights he found a small quantity of it conducive to sleep. Andrew Carnegie, learning of this custom, made it his business to supply Scotch of his own special importation. The first case came direct from Scotland. When it arrived, Clemens sent this characteristic acknowledgment: To Andrew Carnegie, in Scotland, 21 Fifth Avenue, February 10, '06. Dear St. Andrew, the whiskey arrived in due course from over the water. Last week 1 bottle of it was extracted from the wood and inserted into me on the installment plan, with this result, that I believe it to be the best, smoothest whiskey now on the planet. Thanks. Oh, thanks. I have discarded Peruna. Hoping that you 3 are well and happy, and will be coming back before the winter sets in. I am sincerely yours, Mark. It must have been a small bottle to be consumed by him in a week, or perhaps he had able assistance. The next brief line refers to the manuscript of his article, St. Joan of Arc, presented to the museum at Rouen. To Edward E. Clark, 21 Fifth Avenue, February, 1906. Dear Sir, I have found the original manuscript, and with great pleasure I transmit it herewith, also a printed copy. It is a matter of great pride to me to have any word of mine concerning the world's supremest heroine honored by a place in that museum. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. The series of letters which follows was prepared by Mark Twain and General Fred Grant, mainly with a view of advertising the lecture that Clemens had agreed to deliver for the benefit of the Robert Fulton Monument Association. It was, in fact, to be Mark Twain's farewell lecture, and the association had really proposed to pay him $1,000 for it. The exchange of these letters, however, was never made outside of Mark Twain's bedroom. Propped against the pillows, pen in hand, with General Grant beside him, they arranged the series with the idea of publication. Later the plan was discarded, so that this pleasant foolery appears here for the first time. Private and Confidential Correspondence Telegram Army Headquarters Mark Twain, New York. Would you consider a proposal to talk at Carnegie Hall for the benefit of the Robert Fulton Monument Association, of which you are a vice president, for a fee of $1,000? F. D. Grant, President, Fulton Monument Association. Telegraphic answer: Major General F. D. Grant, Army Headquarters. I shall be glad to do it, but I must stipulate that you keep the $1,000 and add it to the Monument Fund as my contribution. Clemens. Letters. Dear Mr. Clemens, You have the thanks of the association, and the terms shall be as you say. But why give all of it? Why not reserve a portion? Why should you do this work wholly without compensation? Truly yours, Fred D. Grant. Major General Grant, Army Headquarters. Dear General, because I stopped talking for pay a good many years ago, and I could not resume the habit now without a great deal of personal discomfort. I love to hear myself talk, because I get so much instruction and moral upheaval out of it, but I lose the bulk of this joy when I charge for it. Let the terms stand. General, if I have your approval, I wish to use this good occasion to retire permanently from the platform. Truly yours, S. L. Clemens. Dear Mr. Clemens, certainly. But as an old friend, permit me to say, don't do that. Why should you? You are not old yet. Yours truly, Fred D. Grant. Dear General, I mean the pay platform. I shan't retire from the gratis platform until after I'm dead and courtesy requires me to keep still and not disturb the others. What shall I talk about? My idea is this: to instruct the audience about Robert Fulton, and tell me, was that his real name, or was it his nom de plume? However, never mind. It is not important. I can skip it, and the house will think I knew all about it, but forgot. Could you find out for me if he was one of the signers of the Declaration, and which one? But if it is any trouble, let it alone. I can skip it. Was he out with Paul Jones? Will you ask Horace Porter, and ask him if he brought both of them home? These will be very interesting facts, if they can be established. But never mind, don't trouble Porter. I can establish them anyway. The way I look at it, they are historical gems, gems of the very first water. Well, that is my idea, as I've said. First, excite the audience with a spoonful of information about Fulton. Then quiet down with a barrel of illustration drawn by memory from my books. And if you don't say anything, the house will think they never heard of it before, because people don't really read your books, they only say they do, to keep you from feeling bad. Next, excite the house with another spoonful of Fultonian fact, then tranquilize them again with another barrel of illustration, and so on, all through the evening. And if you are discreet and don't tell them the illustrations don't illustrate anything, they won't notice it, and I will send them home as well informed about Robert Fulton as I am myself. Don't be afraid. I know all about audiences. They believe everything you say, except when you are telling the truth. Truly yours, S. L. Clemens. P.S. Mark all the advertisements private and confidential. Otherwise the people will not read them. M.T. Dear Mr. Clemens, how long shall you talk? I ask in order that we may be able to say when carriages may be called. Very truly yours, Hugh Gordon Miller, Secretary. Dear Mr. Miller, I cannot say for sure. It is my custom to keep on talking till I get the audience cowed. Sometimes it takes an hour and 15 minutes. Sometimes I can do it in an hour. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. Memo. My charge is 2 boxes free. Not the choicest. Sell the choicest. And give me any 6-seat boxes you please. S.L.C. I want Fred Grant, in uniform, on the stage. Also the rest of the officials of the association. Also other distinguished people. All the attractions we can get. Also a seat for Mr. Albert Bigelow Paine, who may be useful to me if he is near me and on the front. S.L.C. The seat chosen for the writer of these notes was to be at the front of the stage in order that the lecturer might lean over now and then and pretend to be asking information concerning Fulton. I was not entirely happy in the thought of this showy honor, and breathed more freely when this plan was abandoned and the part assigned to General Grant. The lecture was given in Carnegie Hall, which had been gaily decorated for the occasion. The house was more than filled, and a great sum of money was realized for the fund. It was that spring that Gorky and Tchaikovsky, the Russian revolutionists, came to America hoping to arouse interest in their cause. The idea of the overthrow of the Russian dynasty was pleasant to Mark Twain. Few things would have given him greater comfort than to have known that a little more than 10 years would see the downfall of Russian imperialism. The letter which follows was a reply to an invitation from Tchaikovsky, urging him to speak at one of the meetings. Dear Mr. Tchaikovsky, I thank you for the honor of the invitation, but I am not able to accept it, because on Thursday evening I shall be presiding at a meeting whose object is to find remunerative work for certain classes of our blind who would gladly support themselves if they had the opportunity. My sympathies are with the Russian Revolution, of course. It goes without saying. I hope it will succeed, and now that I've talked with you, I take heart to believe it will. Government by falsified promises, by lies, by treacheries, and by the butcher knife for the aggrandizement of a single family of drones and its idle and vicious kin, has been borne quite long enough in Russia, I should think, and it is to be hoped that the roused nation, now rising in its strength, will presently put an end to it and set up the republic in its place. Some of us, even of the white-headed, may live to see the blessed day when czars and grand dukes will be as scarce there as I trust they are in heaven. Most sincerely yours, Mark Twain. There came another summer at Dublin, New Hampshire, this time in the fine Upton residence on the other slope of Monadnock, a place of equally beautiful surroundings and an even more extended view. Clemens was at this time working steadily on his so-called autobiography, which was not that, in fact, but a series of remarkable chapters, reminiscent, reflective, commentative, written without any particular sequence as to time or subject matter. He dictated these chapters to a stenographer, usually in the open air, sitting in a comfortable rocker or pacing up and down the long veranda that faced a vast expanse of wooded slope and lake and distant blue mountains. It became one of the happiest occupations of his later years. To W. D. Howells, in Maine: Dublin, Sunday, June 17, '06. Dear Howells, the dictating goes lazily and pleasantly on, with intervals. I find that I have been at it off and on nearly 2 hours a day for 155 days since January 9. To be exact, I've dictated 75 hours in 80 days and loafed 75 days. I've added 60,000 words in the month that I've been here, which indicates that I've dictated during 20 days of that time 40 hours at an average of 1,500 words an hour. It's a plenty, and I'm satisfied. There's a good deal of fat I've dictated, from January 9, 210,000 words, and the fat adds about 50,000 more. The fat is old pigeonholed things of the years gone by, which I or editors didn't dast to print. For instance, I'm dumping in the little old book which I read to you in Hartford about 30 years ago, and which you said publish, and asked Dean Stanley to furnish an introduction. He'll do it. Captain Stormfield's Visit to Heaven. It reads quite to suit me, without altering a word, now that it isn't to see print until I'm dead. Tomorrow I mean to dictate a chapter which will get my heirs and assigns burnt alive if they venture to print it this side of 2006 A.D., which I judge they won't. There'll be lots of such chapters if I live 3 or 4 years longer. The edition of A.D. 2006 will make a stir when it comes out. I shall be hovering around taking notice, along with other dead pals. You are invited. Mark. His tendency to estimate the measure of the work he was doing and had completed must have clung to him from his old printer days. The chapter which was to get his heirs and assigns burned alive was on the Orthodox God, and there was more than one such chapter. In the next letter he refers to 2 exquisite poems by Howells, and the writer of these notes recalls his wonderful reading of them aloud. In Our Town was a collection of short stories then recently issued by William Allen White. Howells had recommended them. To W. D. Howells, in Maine, 21 Fifth Avenue, Tuesday evening. Dear Howells, it is lovely of you to say those beautiful things. I don't know how to thank you enough, but I love you, that I know. I read After the Wedding aloud, and we felt all the pain of it, and the truth. It was very moving and very beautiful. Would have been overcomingly moving, at times, but for the haltings and pauses compelled by the difficulties of manuscript. These were a protection, in that they furnished me time to brace up my voice and get a new start. Jean wanted to keep the manuscript for another reading aloud, and for keeps, too, I suspected. But I said it would be safest to write you about it. I like In Our Town, particularly that kernel of the Lookout Mountain oration, and very particularly pages 212 to 216. I wrote and told White so. After the Wedding, I read The Mother aloud, and sounded its human depths with your deep sea lead. I had not read it before, since it was first published. I have been dictating some fearful things for 4 successive mornings, for no eye but yours to see until I have been dead a century, if then. But I got them out of my system, where they had been festering for years, and that was the main thing. I feel better now. I came down today on business, from house to house in 12½ hours, and expected to arrive dead, but am neither tired nor sleepy. Yours as always, Mark. To William Allen White, in Emporia, Kansas, Dublin, New Hampshire, June 24, 1906. Dear Mr. White, Howells told me that In Our Town was a charming book, and indeed it is. All of it is delightful when read oneself. Parts of it can score finely when subjected to the most exacting of tests, the reading aloud. Pages 197 and 216 are of that grade. I have tried them a couple of times on the family, and pages 212 and 216 are qualified to fetch any house of any country, caste, or color, endowed with those riches which are denied to no nation on the planet, humor and feeling. Talk again, the country is listening. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. Widder Bynner, the poet, was one of the editors of McClure's magazine at this time, but was trying to muster the courage to give up routine work for verse making and the possibility of poverty. Clemens was fond of Bynner and believed in his work. He did not advise him, however, to break away entirely from a salaried position, at least not immediately, but one day Bynner did so, and reported the step he had taken with some doubt as to the answer he would receive. To Widder Bynner, in New York, Dublin, October 5, 1906. Dear Poet, you have certainly done right for several good reasons. At least, of them I can name 2. 1. With your reputation you can have your freedom and yet earn your living. 2. If you fall short of succeeding to your wish, your reputation will provide you another job, and so in high approval I suppress the scolding and give you the saintly and fatherly pat instead. Mark Twain. On another occasion, when Bynner had written a poem to Clara Clemens, her father pretended great indignation that the first poem written by Bynner to any one in his household should not be to him, and threatened revenge. At dinner, shortly after he produced from his pocket a slip of paper on which he had set down what he said was his only poem, he read the lines that follow: Of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these: It might have been. Ah, say not so. As life grows longer, leaner, thinner, we recognize, O God, it might have Bynner. He returned to New York in October, and soon after was presented by Mrs. H. H. Rogers with a handsome billiard table. He had a passion for the game, but had played comparatively little since the old Hartford days of 15 years before, when a group of his friends used to assemble on Friday nights in the room at the top of the house for long, strenuous games and much hilarity. Now the old fever all came back. The fascinations of the game superseded even his interest in the daily dictations. To Mrs. H. H. Rogers, in New York, 21 Fifth Avenue, Monday, November, 1906. Dear Mrs. Rogers, the billiard table is better than the doctor's. It is driving out the heartburn in a most promising way. I have a billiardist on the premises, and I walk not less than 10 miles every day with the cue in my hand, and the walking is not the whole of the exercise, nor the most health giving part of it, I think. Through the multitude of the positions and attitudes it brings into play every muscle in the body, and exercises them all. The games begin right after luncheon, daily, and continue until midnight, with 2 hours intermission for dinner and music, and so it is 9 hours exercise per day, and 10 or 12 on Sunday. Yesterday and last night it was 12, and I slept until 8 this morning without waking. The billiard table, as a Sabbath breaker, can beat any cold breaker in Pennsylvania, and give it 30 in the game. If Mr. Rogers will take to daily billiards he can do without doctors and the massager, I think. We are really going to build a house on my farm, an hour and a half from New York. It is decided. It is to be built by contract, and is to come within $25,000. With love and many thanks, S.L.C. P.S. Clara is in the sanitarium till January 28, when her Western concert tour will begin. She is getting to be a mighty competent singer. You must know Clara better. She is one of the very finest and completest and most satisfactory characters I have ever met. Others knew it before, but I have always been busy with other matters. The billiardist on the premises was the writer of these notes, who earlier in the year had become his biographer, and, in the course of time, his daily companion and friend. The farm mentioned was one which he had bought at Redding, Connecticut, where, later, he built the house known as Stormfield. Henry Mills Alden, for nearly 40 years editor of Harper's Magazine, arrived at his 70th birthday on November 11th that year, and Harper and Brothers had arranged to give him a great dinner in the offices of Franklin Square, where for half a century he had been an active force. Mark Twain, threatened with a cold and knowing the dinner would be strenuous, did not feel able to attend, so wrote a letter which, if found suitable, could be read at the gathering. To Mr. Henry Alden. Alden, dear and ancient friend, it is a solemn moment. You have now reached the age of discretion. You have been a long time arriving. Many years ago you docked me on an article because the subject was too old. Later, you docked me on an article because the subject was too new. Later still, you docked me on an article because the subject was betwixt and between. Once, when I wrote a letter to Queen Victoria, you did not put it in the respectable part of the magazine, but interred it in that potter's field, the editor's drawer. As a result, she never answered it. How often we recall, with regret, that Napoleon once shot at a magazine editor and missed him and killed a publisher. But we remember, with charity, that his intentions were good. You will reform now, Alden. You will cease from these economies, and you will be discharged. But in your retirement you will carry with you the admiration and earnest good wishes of the oppressed and toiling scribes. This will be better than bread. Let this console you when the bread fails. You will carry with you another thing, too, the affection of the scribes, for they all love you in spite of your crimes. For you bear a kind heart in your breast, and the sweet and winning spirit that charms away all the hostilities and animosities, and makes of your enemy your friend, and keeps him so. You have reigned over us 36 years, and please God you shall reign another 36, and peace to Mahmoud on his golden throne. Always yours, Mark. A copyright bill was coming up in Washington, and a delegation of authors went down to work for it. Clemens was not the head of the delegation, but he was the most prominent member of it, as well as the most useful. He invited the writer to accompany him, and elsewhere I have told in detail the story of that excursion. Footnote: See Mark Twain, A Biography, Chapter 251. End of footnote. Which need be but briefly touched upon here. His work was mainly done aside from that of the delegation. They had him scheduled for a speech, however, which he made without notes and with scarcely any preparation. Meantime he had applied to Speaker Cannon for permission to allow him on the floor of the House, where he could buttonhole the Congressman. He was not eligible to the floor without having received the thanks of Congress, hence the following letter. To Hon. Joseph Cannon, House of Representatives, December 7, 1906. Dear Uncle Joseph, please get me the thanks of the Congress, not next week but right away. It is very necessary. Do accomplish this for your affectionate old friend right away, by persuasion if you can, by violence if you must, for it is imperatively necessary that I get on the floor for 2 or 3 hours and talk to the members, man by man, in behalf of the support, encouragement, and protection of one of the nation's most valuable assets in industries, its literature. I have arguments with me, also a barrel with liquid in it. Give me a chance. Get me the thanks of Congress. Don't wait for others. There isn't time. I have stayed away and let Congress alone for 71 years, and I am entitled to thanks. Congress knows it perfectly well, and I have long felt hurt that this quite proper and earned expression of gratitude has been merely felt by the House and never publicly uttered. Send me an order on the Sergeant at Arms, quick. When shall I come? With love and a benediction, Mark Twain. A joke. Mark Twain did not expect any thanks, but he did hope for access to the floor, which once, in an earlier day, had been accorded him. We drove to the Capitol, and he delivered his letter to Uncle Joe by hand. Uncle Joe could not give him the privilege of the floor. The rules had become more stringent. He declared they would hang him if he did such a thing. He added that he had a private room downstairs where Mark Twain might establish headquarters, and that he would assign his colored servant, Neil, of long acquaintanceship with many of the members, to pass the word that Mark Twain was receiving. The result was a great success. All that afternoon members of Congress poured into the Speaker's room, and, in an atmosphere blue with tobacco smoke, Mark Twain talked the gospel of copyright to his heart's content. The bill did not come up for passage that session, but Mark Twain lived to see his afternoon's lobbying bring a return. In 1909, Champ Clark and those others who had gathered around him that afternoon passed a measure that added 14 years to the copyright term. The next letter refers to a proposed lobby of quite a different sort. To Helen Keller, in Wrentham, Massachusetts, 21 Fifth Avenue, December 23, '06. Dear Helen Keller, you say, as a reformer, you know that ideas must be driven home again and again. Yes, I know it, and by old experience I know that speeches and documents and public meetings are a pretty poor and lame way of accomplishing it. Last year I proposed a sane way, one which I had practiced with success for a quarter of a century, but I wasn't expecting it to get any attention, and it didn't. Give me a battalion of 200 winsome young girls and matrons, and let me tell them what to do and how to do it, and I will be responsible for shining results. If I could mass them on the stage in front of the audience and instruct them there, I could make a public meeting take hold of itself and do something really valuable for once. Not that the real instruction would be done there, for it wouldn't. It would be previously done privately, and merely repeated there. But it isn't going to happen. The good old way will be stuck to. There'll be a public meeting, with music and prayer and a wearing report, and a verbal description of the marvels the blind can do, and 17 speeches. Then the call upon all present who are still alive to contribute. This hoary program was invented in the idiot asylum and will never be changed. Its function is to breed hostility to good causes. Some day somebody will recruit my 200, my dear beguilesome Knights of the Golden Fleece, and you will see them make good their ominous name. Mind, we must meet. Not in the grim and ghastly air of the platform, mayhap, but by the friendly fire here at 21. Affectionately your friend, S. L. Clemens. They did meet somewhat later that winter in the friendly parlors of number 21, and friends gathered in to meet the marvelous blind girl and to pay tribute to Miss Sullivan, Mrs. Macy, for her almost incredible achievement. End of section 47. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Section 48 of the Letters of Mark Twain complete. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. The Letters of Mark Twain complete, by Mark Twain. Volume 6, Chapter 46. Letters 1907 to 1908. A Degree from Oxford. The New Home at Reading. The author, J. Howard Moore, sent a copy of his book, The Universal Kinship, with a letter in which he said, most humorists have no anxiety except to glorify themselves and add substance to their pocketbooks by making their readers laugh. You have shown, on many occasions, that your mission is not simply to antidote the melancholy of a world, but includes a real and intelligent concern for the general welfare of your fellow man. The Universal Kinship was the kind of a book that Mark Twain appreciated, as his acknowledgment clearly shows. To Mr. J. Howard Moore, February 2, '07. Dear Mr. Moore, the book has furnished me several days of deep pleasure and satisfaction. It has compelled my gratitude at the same time, since it saves me the labor of stating my own long cherished opinions and reflections and resentments by doing it lucidly and fervently and irascibly for me. There is one thing that always puzzles me. As inheritors of the mentality of our reptile ancestors, we have improved the inheritance by 1,000 grades. But in the matter of the morals which they left us, we have gone backward as many grades. That evolution is strange, and to me unaccountable and unnatural. Necessarily, we started equipped with their perfect and blemishless morals. Now we are wholly destitute. We have no real morals, but only artificial ones, morals created and preserved by the forced suppression of natural and hellish instincts. Yet we are dull enough to be vain of them. Certainly we are a sufficiently comical invention, we humans. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. Mark Twain's own books were always being excommunicated by some librarian, and the matter never failed to invite the attention and amusement of the press and the indignation of many correspondents. Usually the books were Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, the morals of which were not regarded as wholly exemplary. But in 1907 a small library in a very small town attained a day's national notoriety by putting the ban on Eve's Diary, not so much on account of its text as for the chaste and exquisite illustrations by Lester Ralph. When the reporters came in a troop to learn about it, the author said, "I believe this time the trouble is mainly with the pictures. I did not draw them. I wish I had, they are so beautiful." Just at this time, Dr. William Lyon Phelps of Yale was giving a literary talk to the Teachers Club of Hartford, dwelling on the superlative value of Mark Twain's writings for readers old and young. Mrs. F. G. Whitmore, an old Hartford friend, wrote Clemens of the things that Phelps had said, as consolation for Eve's latest banishment. This gave him a chance to add something to what he had said to the reporters. To Mrs. Whitmore, in Hartford, February 7, 1907. Dear Mrs. Whitmore, but the truth is that when a library expels a book of mine and leaves an unexpurgated Bible lying around, where unprotected youth and age can get hold of it, the deep unconscious irony of it delights me and doesn't anger me. But even if it angered me, such words as those of Professor Phelps would take the sting all out. Nobody attaches weight to the freaks of the Charlton Library, but when a man like Phelps speaks, the world gives attention. Some day I hope to meet him and thank him for his courage for saying those things out in public. Custom is to think a handsome thing in private, but tame it down in the utterance. I hope you are all well and happy, and thereto I add my love. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. In May 1907, Mark Twain was invited to England to receive from Oxford the degree of literary doctor. It was an honor that came to him as a sort of laurel crown at the end of a great career, and gratified him exceedingly. To Moberly Bell, of the London Times, he expressed his appreciation. Bell had been over in April, and Clemens believed him concerned in the matter. To Moberly Bell, in London, 21 Fifth Avenue, May 3, '07. Dear Mr. Bell, your hand is in it, and you have my best thanks. Although I wouldn't cross an ocean again for the price of the ship that carried me, I am glad to do it for an Oxford degree. I shall plan to sail for England a shade before the middle of June, so that I can have a few days in London before the 26th. Sincerely, S. L. Clemens. He had taken a house at Tuxedo for the summer, desiring to be near New York City, and in the next letter he writes Mr. Rogers concerning his London plans. We discover also in this letter that he has begun work on the Reading home, and the cost is to come entirely out of the autobiographical chapters then running in the North American Review. It may be of passing interest to note here that he had the usual house builder's fortune. He received $30,000 for the chapters. The house cost him nearly double that amount. To H. H. Rogers, in New York: Tuxedo Park, May 29, '07. Dear Admiral, why, hang it, I'm not going to see you and Mrs. Rogers at all in England. It is a great disappointment. I leave there a month from now, June 29. No, I shall see you, for by your itinerary you are most likely to come to London June 21st or along there. So that is very good and satisfactory. I have declined all engagements but two: Whitelaw Reid, dinner, June 21, and the Pilgrims, lunch, June 25. The Oxford ceremony is June 26. I have paid my return passage in the Minnie something, but it is just possible that I may want to stay in England a week or two longer. I can't tell yet. I do very much want to meet up with the boys for the last time. I have signed the contract for the building of the house on my Connecticut farm and specified the cost limit, and work has been begun. The cost has to all come out of a year's installments of autobiography in the N.A. Review. Clara is winning her way to success and distinction with sure and steady strides. By all accounts, she is singing like a bird, and is not afraid on the concert stage any more. Tuxedo is a charming place. I think it hasn't its equal anywhere. Very best wishes to you both. S. L. C. The story of Mark Twain's extraordinary reception and triumph in England has been told. Footnote: Mark Twain, A Biography, chapters 256 to 259. End of footnote. It was, in fact, the crowning glory of his career. Perhaps one of the most satisfactory incidents of his sojourn was a dinner given to him by the staff of Punch, in the historic offices at 10 Bouverie Street, where no other foreign visitor had been thus honored, a notable distinction. When the dinner ended, little Joy Agnew, daughter of the chief editor, entered and presented to the chief guest the original drawing of a cartoon by Bernard Partridge, which had appeared on the front page of Punch. In this picture, the presiding genius of the paper is offering to Mark Twain health, long life, and happiness from the Punch Bowl. A short time after his return to America he received a pretty childish letter from little Miss Agnew acknowledging a photograph he had sent her, and giving a list of her pets and occupations. Such a letter always delighted Mark Twain, and his pleasure in this one is reflected in his reply. To Miss Joy Agnew, in London: Tuxedo Park, New York. Unto you, greetings and salutation and worship, you dear, sweet little rightly named Joy. I can see you now almost as vividly as I saw you that night when you sat flashing and beaming upon those somber swallow-tails. Fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. Oh, you were indeed the only one. There wasn't even the remotest chance of competition with you, dear. Ah, you are a decoration, you little witch. The idea of your house going to the want and expense of a flower garden! Aren't you enough? And what do you want to go and discourage the other flowers for? Is that the right spirit? Is it considerate? Is it kind? How do you suppose they feel when you come around looking the way you look, and you so pink and sweet and dainty and lovely and supernatural? Why, it makes them feel embarrassed and artificial, of course. And in my opinion, it is just as pathetic as it can be. Now then, you want to reform, dear, and do right. Well, certainly you are well off, Joy. 3 bantams, 3 goldfish, 3 doves, 6 canaries, 2 dogs, 1 cat. All you need now, to be permanently beyond the reach of want, is 1 more dog, just 1 more good, gentle, high-principled, affectionate, loyal dog who wouldn't want any nobler service than the golden privilege of lying at your door nights and biting everything that came along. And I'm that very one, and ready to come at the dropping of a hat. Do you think you could convey my love and thanks to your daddy and Owen Seaman and those other oppressed and downtrodden subjects of yours, you darling small tyrant? On my knees, these with the kiss of fealty from your other subject, Mark Twain. Eleanor Glenn, author of 3 Weeks and Other Erotic Tales, was in America that winter and asked permission to call on Mark Twain. An appointment was made, and Clemens discussed with her for an hour or more those crucial phases of life which have made living a complex problem since the days of Eve in Eden. Mrs. Glenn had never before heard anything like Mark Twain's wonderful talk, and she was anxious to print her interview. She wrote what she could remember of it and sent it to him for approval. If his conversation had been frank, his refusal was hardly less so. To Mrs. Eleanor Glenn, in New York, January 22, '08. Dear Mrs. Glenn, it reads pretty poorly. I get the sense of it, but it is a poor literary job. However, it would have to be that because nobody can be reported, even approximately, except by a stenographer. Approximations, synopsized speeches, translated poems, artificial flowers and chromos all have a sort of value, but it is small. If you had to put upon paper what I really said, it would have wrecked your type machine. I said some fetid, over-vigorous things, but that was because it was a confidential conversation. I said nothing for print. My own report of the same conversation reads like Satan roasting a Sunday school. It, and certain other readable chapters of my autobiography, will not be published until all the Clemens family are dead and correspondingly indifferent. They were written to entertain me, not the rest of the world. I am not here to do good, at least not to do it intentionally. You must pardon me for dictating this letter. I am sick abed, and not feeling as well as I might. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. Among the cultured men of England, Mark Twain had no greater admirer or warmer friend than Andrew Lang. They were at one on most literary subjects, and especially so in their admiration of the life and character of Joan of Arc. Both had written of her, and both held her to be something almost more than mortal. When, therefore, Anatole France published his exhaustive biography of the Maid of Domremy, a book in which he followed, with exaggerated minuteness and innumerable footnotes, every step of Joan's physical career at the expense of her spiritual life, which he was inclined to cheapen, Lang wrote feelingly, and with some contempt of the performance, inviting the author of the Personal Recollections to come to the rescue of their heroine. Compare every one of his statements with the passages he cites from authorities, and make him the laughter of the world, he wrote. If you are lazy about comparing, I can make you a complete set of what the authorities say, and of what this amazing novelist says that they say. When I tell you that he thinks the Epiphany, January 6th, 12th night, is December 25th, Christmas Day, you begin to see what an egregious ass he is. Treat him like Dowden and oblige, a reference to Mark Twain's defense of Harriet Shelley, in which he had heaped ridicule on Dowden's life of the poet, a masterly performance, one of the best that ever came from Mark Twain's pen. Lang's suggestion would seem to have been a welcome one. To Andrew Lang, in London: New York, April 25, 1908. Dear Mr. Lang, I haven't seen the book nor any review of it, but only not very understandable references to it, of a sort which discomforted me, but of course set my interest on fire. I don't want to have to read it in French. I should lose the nice shades, and should do a lot of gross misinterpreting, too. But there'll be a translation soon, nicht wahr? I will wait for it. I note with joy that you say, if you are lazy about comparing, which I most certainly am, I can make you a complete set of what the authorities say, and of what this amazing novelist says that they say. Do it for me. Then I will attempt the article, and, if I succeed in doing it to my satisfaction, will publish it. It is long since I touched a pen, 3½ years, and I was intending to continue this happy holiday to the gallows, but there are things that could beguile me to break this blessed Sabbath. Yours very sincerely, S. L. Clemens. Certainly it is an interesting fact that an Englishman, one of the race that burned Joan, should feel moved to defend her memory against the top-heavy perversions of a distinguished French author. But Lang seems never to have sent the notes. The copying would have been a tremendous task, and perhaps he never found the time for it. We may regret today that he did not, for Mark Twain's article on the French author's Joan would have been at least unique. Samuel Clemens could never accustom himself to the loss of his wife. From the time of her death, marriage, which had brought him his greatest joy in life, presented itself to him always with the thought of bereavement, waiting somewhere just behind. The news of an approaching wedding saddened him, and there was nearly always a somber tinge in his congratulations, of which the following, to a dear friend, is an example. To Father Fitzsimmons, in Washington, June 5, '08. Dear Father Fitzsimmons, marriage, yes, it is the supreme felicity of life, I concede it, and it is also the supreme tragedy of life. The deeper the love, the surer the tragedy, and the more disconsolating when it comes. And so I congratulate you, not perfunctorily, not lukewarmly, but with a fervency and fire that no word in the dictionary is strong enough to convey, and in the same breath and with the same depth and sincerity I grieve for you. Not for both of you, and not for the one that shall go first, but for the one that is fated to be left behind. For that one there is no recompense. For that one no recompense is possible. There are times, thousands of times, when I can expose the half of my mind and conceal the other half. But in the matter of the tragedy of marriage I feel too deeply for that, and I have to bleed it all out or shut it all in. And so you must consider what I have been through, and am passing through, and be charitable with me. Make the most of the sunshine, and I hope it will last long, ever so long. I do not really want to be present, yet for friendship's sake and because I honor you so, I would be there if I could. Most sincerely, your friend. S. L. Clemens.
The new home at Redding was completed in the spring of 1908, and on the 18th of June, when it was entirely fitted and furnished, Mark Twain entered it for the first time. He had never even seen the place, nor carefully examined plans which John Howells had made for his house. He preferred the surprise of it and the general avoidance of detail. That he was satisfied with the result will be seen in his letters. He named it at first Innocents at Home, later changing this title to Stormfield. The letter which follows is an acknowledgment of an interesting souvenir from the battlefield of Tewksbury, 1471, and some relics of the Cavalier and Roundhead regiments encamped at Tewksbury in 1643. To an English admirer: Innocents at Home, Redding, Connecticut, August 15, '08. Dear Sir, I highly prize the pipes, and shall intimate to people that Raleigh smoked them, and doubtless he did. After a little practice I shall be able to go further and say he did. They will then be the most interesting features of my library's decorations. The horseshoe is attracting a good deal of attention, because I have intimated that the Conqueror's horse cast it. It will attract more when I get my hand in and say he cast it. I thank you for the pipes and the shoe, and also for the official guide, which I read through at a single sitting. If a person should say that about a book of mine, I should regard it as good evidence of the book's interest. Very truly yours, S. L. Clemens. In his philosophy, What is Man, and now and again in his other writings, we find Mark Twain giving small credit to the human mind as an originator of ideas. The most original writer of his time, he took no credit for pure invention, and allowed none to others. The mind, he declared, adapted, consciously or unconsciously. It did not create. In a letter which follows, he elucidates this doctrine. The reference in it to the captain and to the kerosene, as the reader may remember, have to do with Captain Hurricane Jones and his theory of the miracles of Isaac and of the prophets of Baal, as expounded in some rambling notes of an idle excursion. By a trick of memory, Clemens gives the little Duke as his suggestion for The Prince and the Pauper. He should have written The Prince and the Page by the same author. To Rev. F. Y. Christ, in New York, Redding, Connecticut, August, '08. Dear Sir, you say I often owe my best sermons to a suggestion received in reading or from other exterior sources. Your remark is not quite in accordance with the facts. We must change it to I owe all my thoughts, sermons, and ideas to suggestions received from sources outside of myself. The simplified English of this proposition is, no man's brains ever originated an idea. It is an astonishing thing that after all these ages the world goes on thinking the human brain machinery can originate a thought. It can't. It never has done it. In all cases, little and big, the thought is born of a suggestion, and in all cases the suggestions come to the brain from the outside. The brain never acts except from exterior impulse. A man can satisfy himself of the truth of this by a single process. Let him examine every idea that occurs to him in an hour, a day, in a week, in a lifetime if it please. He will always find that an outside something suggested the thought, something which he saw with his eyes or heard with his ears or perceived by his touch, not necessarily today, nor yesterday, nor last year, nor 20 years ago, but sometime or other. Usually the source of the suggestion is immediately traceable, but sometimes it isn't. However,
If you will examine every thought that occurs to you for the next 2 days, you will find that in at least 9 cases out of 10 you can put your finger on the outside suggestion, and that ought to convince you that number 10 had that source too, although you cannot at present hunt it down and find it. The idea of writing to me would have had to wait a long time if it waited until your brain originated it. It was born of an outside suggestion, Sir Thomas and my old captain. The hypnotist thinks he has invented a new thing, suggestion. This is very sad. I don't know where my captain got his kerosene idea. It was 41 years ago, and he is long ago dead. But I know that it didn't originate in his head, but it was born from a suggestion from the outside. Yesterday a guest said, "How did you come to think of writing The Prince and the Pauper?" I didn't. The thought came to me from the outside, suggested by that pleasant and picturesque little history book, Charlotte M. Young's Little Duke. I doubt if Mrs. Burnett knows whence came to her the suggestion to write Little Lord Fauntleroy, but I know. It came to her from reading The Prince and the Pauper. In all my life I've never originated an idea, and neither has she, nor anybody else. Man's mind is a clever machine, and can work up materials into ingenious fancies and ideas, but it can't create the material. None but the gods can do that. In Sweden I saw a vast machine receive a block of wood and turn it into marketable matches in 2 minutes. It could do everything but make the wood. That is the kind of machine the human mind is. Maybe this is not a large compliment, but it is all I can afford. Your friend and well-wisher, S. L. Clemens. To Mrs. H. H. Rogers, in Fairhaven, Massachusetts: Redding, Connecticut, August 12, 1908. Dear Mrs. Rogers, I believe I am the wellest man on the planet today, and good for a trip to Fairhaven, which I discussed with the captain of the New Bedford boat, who pleasantly accosted me in the Grand Central, August 5. But the doctor came up from New York day before yesterday and gave positive orders that I must not stir from here before frost. It is because I was threatened with a swoon 10 or 12 days ago, and went to New York a day or 2 later to attend my nephew's funeral, and got horribly exhausted by the heat, and came back here and had a bilious collapse. In 24 hours I was as sound as a nut again, but nobody believes it but me. This is a prodigiously satisfactory place, and I am so glad I don't have to go back to the turmoil and rush of New York. The house stands high and the horizons are wide, yet the seclusion is perfect. The nearest public road is half a mile away, so there's nobody to look in, and I don't have to wear clothes if I don't want to. I've been downstairs in nightgown and slippers a couple of hours, and have been photographed in that costume. But I will dress now and behave myself. That doctor had half an idea that there is something the matter with my brain. Doctors do know so little, and they do charge so much for it. I wish Henry Rogers would come here, and I wish you would come with him. You can't rest in that crowded place, but you could rest here for sure. I would learn bridge and entertain you, and rob you. With love to you both, ever yours, S. L. C.
In the foregoing letter we get the first intimation of Mark Twain's failing health. The nephew who had died was Samuel E. Moffett, son of Pamela Clemens. Moffett, who was a distinguished journalist, an editorial writer on Collier's Weekly, a man beloved by all who knew him, had been drowned in the surf off the Jersey beach. To W. D. Howells, Kittery Point, Maine, August 12, '08.
Dear Howells, won't you and Mrs. Howells and Mildred come and give us as many days as you can spare, and examine John's Triumph? It is the most satisfactory house I am acquainted with, and the most satisfactorily situated. But it is no place to work in, because one is outside of it all the time while the sun and the moon are on duty, outside of it in the loggia where the breezes blow and the tall arches divide up the scenery and frame it. It's a ghastly long distance to come, and I wouldn't travel such a distance to see anything short of a memorial museum. But if you can't come now, you can at least come later when you return to New York, for the journey will be only an hour and a half per express train. Things are gradually and steadily taking shape inside the house, and Nature is taking care of the outside in her ingenious and wonderful fashion. And she is competent, and asks no help, and gets none. I have retired from New York for good. I have retired from labor for good. I have dismissed my stenographer and have entered upon a holiday whose other end is in the cemetery. Yours ever, Mark. From a gentleman in Buffalo, Clemens one day received a letter enclosing an incompleted list of the world's 100 greatest men, men who had exerted the largest visible influence on the life and activities of the race. The writer asked that Mark Twain examine the list and suggest names, adding, "Would you include Jesus as the founder of Christianity in the list?" To the list of statesmen, Clemens added the name of Thomas Paine. To the list of inventors, Edison and Alexander Graham Bell. The question he answered in detail. To Blink, Buffalo, New York, private, Redding, Connecticut, August 28, '08. Dear Sir, by private, I mean don't print any remarks of mine. I like your list. The largest visible influence. These terms require you to add Jesus, and they doubly and trebly require you to add Satan. From A.D. 350 to A.D. 1850, these gentlemen exercised a vaster influence over a fifth part of the human race than was exercised over that fraction of the race by all other influences combined. 99 hundredths of this influence proceeded from Satan, the remaining fraction of it from Jesus. During those 1,500 years, the fear of Satan and hell made 99 Christians where love of God and heaven landed one. During those 1,500 years, Satan's influence was worth very nearly 100 times as much to the business as was the influence of all the rest of the Holy Family put together. You have asked me a question, and I have answered it seriously and sincerely. You have put in Buddha, a god, with a following, at one time, greater than Jesus ever had, a god with perhaps a little better evidence of his godship than that which is offered for Jesus's. How, then, in fairness, can you leave Jesus out? And if you put him in, how can you logically leave Satan out? Thunder is good, thunder is impressive, but it is the lightning that does the work. Very truly yours, S. L. Clemens. The Children's Theater of the next letter was an institution of the New York East Side in which Mark Twain was deeply interested. The children were most, if not all, of Hebrew parentage, and the performances they gave, under the direction of Alice M. Hertz, were really remarkable. It seemed a pity that lack of funds should have brought this excellent educational venture to an untimely end. The following letter was in reply to one enclosing a newspaper clipping reporting a performance of The Prince and the Pauper, given by Chicago school children. To Mrs. Hookway, in Chicago, September, 1908. Dear Mrs. Hookway, Although I am full of the spirit of work this morning, a rarity with me, lately, I must steal a moment or two for a word in person, for I have been reading the eloquent account in the Record Herald, and am pleasurably stirred to my deepest deeps. The reading brings vividly back to me my pet and pride, the Children's Theatre of the East Side, New York, and it supports and reaffirms what I have so often and strenuously said in public, that a children's theatre is easily the most valuable adjunct that any educational institution for the young can have, and that no otherwise good school is complete without it. It is much the most effective teacher of morals and promoter of good conduct that the ingenuity of man has yet devised, for the reason that its lessons are not taught wearily by book and by dreary homily, but by visible and enthusing action, and they go straight to the heart, which is the rightest of right places for them. Book morals often get no further than the intellect, if they even get that far on their spectral and shadowy pilgrimage, but when they travel from a children's theatre they do not stop permanently at that halfway house, but go on home. The Children's Theatre is the only teacher of morals and conduct and high ideals that never bores the pupil, but always leaves him sorry when the lesson is over. And as for history, no other teacher is for a moment comparable to it. No other can make the dead heroes of the world rise up and shake the dust of the ages from their bones, and live and move and breathe and speak and be real to the looker and listener. No other can make the study of the lives and times of the illustrious dead a delight, a splendid interest, a passion. And no other can paint a history lesson in colors that will stay and never fade. It is my conviction that the Children's Theatre is one of the very, very great inventions of the 20th century, and that its vast educational value, now but dimly perceived and but vaguely understood, will presently come to be recognized. By the article which I have been reading, I find the same things happening in the Howland School that we have become familiar with in our Children's Theatre, of which I am president, and sufficiently vain of the distinction. These things among others: 1. The educating history study does not stop with the little players, but the whole school catches the infection and revels in it. 2. And it doesn't even stop there. The children carry it home and infect the family with it, even the parents and grandparents, and the whole household fall to studying history and bygone manners and customs and costumes with eager interest. And this interest is carried along to the studying of costumes in old book plates, and beyond that to the selecting of fabrics and the making of clothes. Hundreds of our children learn the plays by listening without book and by making notes. Then the listener goes home and plays the piece, all the parts, to the family. And the family are glad and proud, glad to listen to the explanations and analyses, glad to learn, glad to be lifted to planes above their dreary workaday lives. Our Children's Theatre is educating 7,000 children and their families. When we put on a play of Shakespeare, they fall to studying it diligently, so that they may be qualified to enjoy it to the limit when the piece is staged. 3. Your Howland School children do the construction work, stage decorations, etc. That is our way, too. Our young folks do everything that is needed by the theatre, with their own hands: scene designing, scene painting, gas fitting, electric work, costume designing, costume making, everything and all things indeed, and their orchestra and its leader are from their own ranks. The article which I have been reading says, speaking of the historical play produced by the pupils of the Howland School, The question naturally arises, what has this drama done for those who so enthusiastically took part? The touching story has made a year out of the past live for the children as could no chronology or bald statement of historical events. It has cultivated the fancy and given to the imagination strength and purity. Work in composition has ceased to be drudgery, for when all other themes fall flat, a subject dealing with some aspect of the drama presented never fails to arouse interest and a rapid pushing of pens over paper. That is entirely true. The interest is not confined to the drama's story. It spreads out all around the period of the story, and gives to all the outlying and unrelated happenings of that period a fascinating interest, an interest which does not fade out with the years, but remains always fresh, always inspiring, always welcome. History facts dug by the job, with sweat and tears out of a dry and spiritless textbook, but never mind. All who have suffered know what that is. I remain, dear madam, sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. Mark Twain had a special fondness for cats. As a boy he always owned one, and it generally had a seat beside him at the table. There were cats at Quarry Farm and at Hartford, and in the house at Redding there was a gray mother cat named Tammany, of which he was especially fond. Kittens capering about were his chief delight. In a letter to a Chicago woman he tells how those of Tammany assisted at his favorite game. To Mrs. Mabel Larkin Patterson, in Chicago: Redding, Connecticut, October 2, '08. Dear Mrs. Patterson, the contents of your letter are very pleasant and very welcome, and I thank you for them sincerely. If I can find a photograph of my Tammany and her kittens, I will enclose it in this. One of them likes to be crammed into a corner pocket of the billiard table, which he fits as snugly as does a finger in a glove, and then he watches the game, and obstructs it, by the hour, and spoils many a shot by putting out his paw and changing the direction of a passing ball. Whenever a ball is in his arms, or so close to him that it cannot be played upon without risk of hurting him, the player is privileged to remove it to any one of the 3 spots that chances to be vacant. Ah, no, my election days are over for good and all. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. The letter to Howells which follows was written a short time before the passage of the Copyright Extension Bill, which rendered Mark Twain's new plan, here mentioned, unneeded, at least for the time. To W. D. Howells, in New York: Monday, October 26, '08. Oh, I say, where are you hiding, and why are you hiding? You promised to come here, and you didn't keep your word. This sounds like astonishment, but don't be misled by that. Come, fire up again on your fiction mill, and give us another good promise, and this time keep it, for it is your turn to be astonished. Come and stay as long as you possibly can. I invented a new copyright extension scheme last Friday, and sat up all night arranging its details. It will interest you. Yesterday I got it down on paper in as compact a form as I could. Harvey and I have examined the scheme, and tomorrow or next day he will send me a couple of copyright experts to arrange about getting certain statistics for me. Authors, publishers, and the public have always been damaged by the copyright laws. The proposed amendment will advantage all 3, the public most of all. I think Congress will pass it and settle the vexed question permanently. I shall need your assent and the assent of about a dozen other authors. Also the assent of all the large firms of the 300 publishers. These authors and publishers will furnish said assent, I am sure. Not even the pirates will be able to furnish a serious objection, I think. Come along. This place seemed at its best when all around was summer green. Later it seemed at its best when all around was burning with the autumn splendors. And now once more it seems at its best with the trees naked and the ground a painter's palette. Yours ever, Mark.
Clemens was a great admirer of the sea stories of W. W. Jacobs, and generally kept one or more of this author's volumes in reach of his bed, where most of his reading was done. The acknowledgment that follows was sent when he had finished Salthaven.
To W. W. Jacobs, in England: Redding, Connecticut, October 28, '08. Dear Mr. Jacobs, it has a delightful look. I will not venture to say how delightful, because the words would sound extravagant, and would thereby lose some of their strength, and to that degree misrepresent me. It is my conviction that Dialstone Lane holds the supremacy over all purely humorous books in our language, but I feel about Salthaven as the Cape Cod poet feels about Simon Hanks. The Lord knows all things, great and small. With doubt he's not perplexed. 'Tis him alone that knows it all, but Simon Hanks comes next. The poet was moved by envy and malice and jealousy, but I am not. I place Salthaven close up next to Dialstone because I think it has a fair and honest right to that high position. I have kept the other book moving. I shall begin to hand this one around now. And many thanks to you for remembering me. This house is out in the solitudes of the woods and the hills, an hour and a half from New York, and I mean to stay in it winter and summer, the rest of my days. I beg you to come and help occupy it a few days the next time you visit the U.S. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens.
One of the attractions of Stormfield was a beautiful mantel in the billiard room, presented by the Hawaiian Promotion Committee. It had not arrived when the rest of the house was completed, but came in time to be set in place early in the morning of the owner's 73rd birthday. It was made of a variety of Hawaiian woods, and was the work of a native carver, F. M. Otremba. Clemens was deeply touched by the offering from those Western Isles, the memory of which was always so sweet to him.
To Mr. Wood, in Hawaii: November 30, '08. Dear Mr. Wood, the beautiful mantel was put in its place an hour ago, and its friendly aloha was the first uttered greeting my 73rd birthday received. It is rich in color, rich in quality, and rich in decoration. Therefore it exactly harmonizes with the taste for such things which was born in me and which I have seldom been able to indulge to my content. It will be a great pleasure to me, daily renewed, to have under my eye this lovely reminder of the loveliest fleet of islands that lies anchored in any ocean, and I beg to thank the committee for providing me that pleasure. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens.
End of Section 48. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Section 49 of the Letters of Mark Twain complete. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. The Letters of Mark Twain complete, by Mark Twain. Volume 6, Chapter 47. Letters 1909. To Howells and Others. Life at Stormfield. Copyright extension. Death of Jean Clemens. Clemens remained at Stormfield all that winter. New York was 60 miles away, and he did not often care to make the journey. He was constantly invited to this or that public gathering or private party, but such affairs had lost interest for him. He preferred the quiet of his luxurious home with its beautiful outlook, while for entertainment he found the billiard afternoons sufficient. Guests came from the city now and again for week-end visits, and if he ever was restless or lonely he did not show it. Among the invitations that came was one from General O. O. Howard, asking him to preside at a meeting to raise an endowment fund for a Lincoln Memorial University at Cumberland Gap, Tennessee. Closing his letter, General Howard said, "Never mind if you did fight on the other side." To General O. O. Howard, Stormfield, Redding, Connecticut, January 12, '09. Dear General Howard, you pay me a most gratifying compliment in asking me to preside, and it causes me very real regret that I am obliged to decline, for the object of the meeting appeals strongly to me, since that object is to aid in raising the $500,000 endowment fund for Lincoln Memorial University. The endowment fund will be the most fitting of all the memorials the country will dedicate to the memory of Lincoln, serving as it will to uplift his very own people. I hope you will meet with complete success, and I am sorry I cannot be there to witness it and help you rejoice. But I am older than people think, and besides, I live away out in the country and never stir from home, except at geological intervals, to fill left-over engagements in Mesozoic times when I was younger and indiscreeter. You ought not to say sarcastic things about my fighting on the other side. General Grant did not act like that. General Grant paid me compliments. He bracketed me with Xenophon. It is there in his memoirs for anybody to read. He said if all the Confederate soldiers had followed my example and adopted my military arts, he could never have caught enough of them in a bunch to inconvenience the rebellion. General Grant was a fair man and recognized my worth, but you are prejudiced, and you have hurt my feelings. But I have an affection for you anyway. Mark Twain. One of Mark Twain's friends was Henniker Heaton, the so-called father of penny postage between England and America. When, after long years of effort, he succeeded in getting the rate established, he at once bent his energies in the direction of cheap cable service, and a letter from him came one day to Stormfield concerning his new plans. This letter happened to be overweight, which gave Mark Twain a chance for some amusing exaggerations at his expense. To Henniker Heaton, in London: Stormfield, Redding, Connecticut, January 18, 1909. Dear Henniker Heaton, I do hope you will succeed to your heart's desire in your cheap cablegram campaign, and I feel sure you will. Indeed, your cheap postage victory, achieved in spite of a quarter century of determined opposition, is good and rational prophecy that you will. Wireless, not being as yet imprisoned in a Chinese wall of private cash and high-placed and formidable influence, will come to your aid and make your new campaign briefer and easier than the other one was. Now then, after uttering my serious word, am I privileged to be frivolous for a moment? When you shall have achieved cheap telegraphy, are you going to employ it for just your own selfish profit and other people's pecuniary damage, the way you are doing with your cheap postage? You get letter postage reduced to 2 cents an ounce, then you mail me a 4-ounce letter with a 2-cent stamp on it, and I have to pay the extra freight at this end of the line. I return your envelope for inspection. Look at it. Stamped in one place is a vast T, and under it the figures 40,
and under those figures appears an L, a sinister and suspicious and mysterious L. In another place, stamped within a circle, in offensively large capitals, you find the words "Due 8 cents." Finally, in the midst of a desert space up nor'eastward from that circle, you find a figure 3 of quite unnecessarily aggressive and insolent magnitude, and done with a blue pencil, so as to be as conspicuous as possible. I inquired about these strange signs and symbols of the postman. He said they were Post Office Department signals for his instruction. Instruction for what? To get extra postage. Is it so? Explain. Tell me about the large T and the 40. It's short for take 40, or as we postmen say, grab 40. Go on, please, while I think up some words to swear with. Do 8 means grab 8 more. Continue. The blue pencil 3 was an afterthought. There aren't any stamps for afterthoughts. The sums vary, according to inspiration, and they whirl in the one that suggests itself at the last moment. Sometimes they go several times higher than this one. This one only means hog 3 cents more, and if you've got 51 cents about you, or can borrow it. Tell me, who gets this corruption? Half of it goes to the man in England who ships the letter on short postage, and the other half goes to the Post Office Department to protect cheap postage from inaugurating a deficit. Blank. I can't blame you. I would say it myself in your place if these ladies were not present. But you see, I'm only obeying orders. I can't help myself. Oh, I know it. I'm not blaming you. Finally, what does that L stand for? Get the money or give him L. It's English, you know. Take it and go. It's the last cent I've got in the world. After seeing the Oxford pageant filed by the grandstand, picture after picture, splendor after splendor, 3,500 strong, the most moving and beautiful and impressive and historically instructive show conceivable, you are not to think I would miss the London pageant of next year, with its shining host of 15,000 historical English men and women dug from the misty books of all the vanished ages and marching in the light of the sun, all alive and looking just as they were used to look. Mr. Lascelles spent yesterday here on the farm, and told me all about it. I shall be in the middle of my 75th year, then, and interested in pageants for personal and prospective reasons. I beg you to give my best thanks to the Bath Club for the offer of its hospitalities, but I shall not be able to take advantage of it because I am to be a guest in a private house during my stay in London. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. It was in 1907 that Clemens had seen the Oxford pageant during the week when he had been awarded his doctor's degree. It gave him the greatest delight, and he fully expected to see the next one, planned for 1910. In the letter to Howells which follows, we get another glimpse of Mark Twain's philosophy of man, the irresponsible machine. To W. D. Howells, in New York: Stormfield, Redding, Connecticut, January 18, '09. Dear Howells, I have to write a line, lazy as I am, to say how your Poe article delighted me, and to say that I am in agreement with substantially all you say about his literature. To me, his prose is unreadable, like Jane Austen's. No, there is a difference. I could read his prose on salary, but not Jane's. Jane is entirely impossible. It seems a great pity that they allowed her to die a natural death. Another thing. You grant that God and circumstances sinned against Poe. but you also grant that he sinned against himself, a thing which he couldn't do and didn't do. It is lively up here now. I wish you could come. Yours ever, Mark. To W. D. Howells, in New York: Stormfield, Redding, Connecticut, 3 in the morning, April 17, '09. Written with pencil. My pen has gone dry, and the ink is out of reach. Howells, did you write me day before yesterday, or did I dream it? In my mind's eye I most vividly see your handwrite on a square blue envelope in the mail pile. I have hunted the house over, but there is no such letter. Was it an illusion? I'm reading Lowell's letter and smoking. I woke an hour ago, and am reading to keep from wasting the time. On page 305, Volume 1, I have just margined a note. Young friend, I like that. You ought to see him now. It seems startlingly strange to hear a person call you young. It was a brick out of a blue sky, and knocked me groggy for a moment. Ah me! The pathos of it is that we were young then, and he, why, so was he, but he didn't know it. He didn't even know it 9 years later, when we saw him approaching and you warned me, saying, "Don't say anything about age. He has just turned 50, and thinks he is old and broods over it." Well, Clara did sing, and you wrote her a dear letter. Time to go to sleep. Yours ever, Mark. To Daniel Kiefer, no date. Daniel Kiefer, Esquire. Dear Sir, I should be far from willing to have a political party named after me. I would not be willing to belong to a party which allowed its members to have political aspirations, or to push friends forward for political preferment. Yours very truly, S. L. Clemens. The copyright extension for which the author had been working so long was granted by Congress in 1909, largely as the result of that afternoon in Washington when Mark Twain had received in Uncle Joe Cannon's private room and preached the gospel of copyright until the daylight faded and the rest of the Capitol grew still. Champ Clark was the last to linger that day, and they had talked far into the dusk. Clark was powerful, and had fathered the bill. Now he wrote to know if it was satisfactory. To Champ Clark, in Washington: Stormfield, Redding, Connecticut, June 5, '09. Dear Champ Clark, is the new copyright law acceptable to me? Emphatically yes. Clark, it is the only sane and clearly defined and just and righteous copyright law that has ever existed in the United States. Whosoever will compare it with its predecessors will have no trouble in arriving at that decision. The bill which was before the committee 2 years ago when I was down there was the most stupefying jumble of conflicting and apparently irreconcilable interests that was ever seen. And we all said, the case is hopeless, absolutely hopeless. Out of this chaos nothing can be built. But we were in error. Out of that chaotic mass this excellent bill has been instructed. The warring interests have been reconciled, and the result is as comely and substantial a legislative edifice as lifts its domes and towers and protective lightning rods out of the statute book, I think. When I think of that other bill, which even the deity couldn't understand, and of this one which even I can understand, I take off my hat to the man or men who devised this one. Was it R. U. Johnson? Was it the Authors' League? Was it both together? I don't know, but I take off my hat anyway. Johnson has written a valuable article about the new law. I enclose it. At last, and for the first time in copyright history, we are ahead of England. Ahead of her in two ways, by length of time and by fairness to all interests concerned. Does this sound like shouting? Then I must modify it. All we possessed of copyright justice before the 4th of last March we owed to England's initiative. Truly yours, S. L. Clemens. Because Mark Twain amused himself with certain aspects of Christian Science and was critical of Mrs. Eddy, there grew up a wide impression that he jeered at the theory of mental healing, when, as a matter of fact, he was one of its earliest converts, and never lost faith in its power. The letter which follows is an excellent exposition of his attitude toward the institution of Christian Science and the founder of the Church in America. To J. Wiley Smith, Glasgow, Scotland: Stormfield, August 7, 1909. Dear Sir, my view of the matter has not changed, to wit, that Christian Science is valuable, that it has just the same value now that it had when Mrs. Eddy stole it from Quimby, that its healing principle, its most valuable asset, possesses the same force now that it possessed 1,000,000 years ago before Quimby was born, that Mrs. Eddy organized that force and is entitled to high credit for that. Then, with a splendid sagacity, she hitched it to a religion, the surest of all ways to secure friends for it and support. In a fine and lofty way, figuratively speaking, it was a tramp stealing a ride on the Lightning Express. Ah, how did that ignorant village-born peasant woman know the human being so well? She has no more intellect than a tadpole, until it comes to business, then she is a marvel. Am I sorry I wrote the book? Most certainly not. You say you have 500 converts in Glasgow. 50 years from now your posterity will not count them by the hundred, but by the thousand. I feel absolutely sure of this. Very truly yours, S. L. Clemens. Clemens wrote very little for publication that year, but he enjoyed writing for his own amusement, setting down the things that boiled or bubbled within him. Mainly chapters on the inconsistencies of human deportment, human superstition, and human creeds. The Letters from the Earth, referred to in the following, were supposed to have been written by an immortal visitant from some far realm to a friend, describing the absurdities of mankind. It is true, as he said, that they would not do for publication, though certainly the manuscript contains some of his most delicious writing. Miss Wallace, to whom the next letter is written, had known Mark Twain in Bermuda, and after his death published a dainty volume entitled Mark Twain in the Happy Island. Stormfield, Redding, Connecticut, November 13, '09. Dear Betsy, I've been writing letters from the earth, and if you will come here and see us, I will what? Put the manuscript in your hands, with the places to skip marked? No, I won't trust you quite that far. I'll read messages to you. This book will never be published. In fact, it couldn't be, because it would be felony to soil the mails with it, for it has much Holy Scripture in it of the kind that can't properly be read aloud, except from the pulpit and in family worship. Paine enjoys it, but Paine is going to be damned one of these days, I suppose. The autumn splendors passed you by. What a pity! I wish you had been here. It was beyond words. It was heaven and hell and sunset and rainbows and the aura all fused into one divine harmony, and you couldn't look at it and keep the tears back. All the Hosanna and strong gorgeousnesses have gone back to heaven and hell and the pole now. But no matter. If you could look out of my bedroom window at this moment, you would choke up, and when you got your voice you would say, "This is not real, this is a dream." Such a singing together, and such a whispering together, and such a snuggling together of cozy soft colors, and such kissing and caressing, and such pretty blushing when the sun breaks out and catches those dainty weeds at it. You remember that weed garden of mine. And then the far hills sleeping in a dim blue trance. Oh, hearing about it is nothing. You should be here to see it. Good. I wish I could go on the platform and read. And I could, if it could be kept out of the papers. There's a charity school of 400 young girls in Boston that I would give my ears to talk to, if I had some more. But, oh well, I can't go, and it's no use to grieve about it. This morning Jean went to town, also Paine, also the butler, also Katie, also the laundress. The cook and the maid and the boy and the roustabout and Jean's coachman are left, just enough to make it lonesome, because they are around, yet never visible. However, the Harpers are sending Lee up to play billiards. Therefore, I shall survive. Affectionately, S. L. Clemens. Early in June that year, Clemens had developed unmistakable symptoms of heart trouble of a very serious nature. It was angina pectoris, and while to all appearances he was as well as ever, and usually felt so, he was periodically visited by severe attacks of acute breast pains, which, as the months passed, increased in frequency and severity. He was alarmed and distressed, not on his own account but because of his daughter Jean, a handsome girl who had long been subject to epileptic seizures. In case of his death, he feared that Jean would be without permanent anchorage. His other daughter, Clara, following her marriage to Ossip Gabrilowitsch in October, having taken up residence abroad. This anxiety was soon ended. On the morning of December 24th, Jean Clemens was found dead in her apartment. She was not drowned in her bath, as was reported, but died from heart exhaustion, the result of her malady and the shock of cold water. Footnote: Questionable diagnosis. D.W., M.D. End of footnote. The blow to her father was terrible, but heavy as it was, one may perhaps understand that her passing in that swift, painless way must have afforded him a measure of relief. To Mrs. Gabrilowitsch, in Europe: Redding, Connecticut, December 29, '09. Oh, Clara! Clara, dear, I am so glad she is out of it and safe. Safe! I'm not melancholy. I shall never be melancholy again, I think. You see, I was in such distress when I came to realize that you were gone far away, and no one stood between her and danger but me, and I could die at any moment, and then, oh, then what would become of her? For she was willful, you know, and would not have been governable. You can't imagine what a darling she was that last 2 or 3 days, and how fine and good and sweet and noble and joyful, thank heaven, and how intellectually brilliant. I had never been acquainted with Jean before. I recognized that. But I mustn't try to write about her. I can't. I've already poured my heart out with the pen, recording that last day or 2. I will send you that, and you must let no one but Ossip read it. Good bye. I love you so, and Ossip. Father. The writing mentioned in the last paragraph was his article, "The Death of Jean," his last serious writing, and one of the world's most beautiful examples of elegiac prose. Footnote: Harper's Magazine, December, 1910. End of footnote.
and later in the volume, What is Man and Other Essays. End of section 49. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Section 50 of the Letters of Mark Twain complete. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. The Letters of Mark Twain complete. By Mark Twain. Volume 6, Chapter 48. Letters of 1910. Last Trip to Bermuda. Letters to Paine. The Last Letter. Mark Twain had returned from a month's trip to Bermuda a few days before Jean died. Now, by his physician's advice, he went back to those balmy islands. He had always loved them since his first trip there with Twichell 33 years earlier. And at Bay House, the residence of Vice Consul Allen, where he was always a welcome guest. He could have the attentions and care and comforts of a home. Taking Claude the butler as his valet, he sailed January 5th and presently sent back a letter in which he said, "Again, I'm leading the ideal life, and am immeasurably content." By his wish, the present writer and his family were keeping the Stormfield house open for him, in order that he might be able to return to its comforts at any time. He sent frequent letters, 1 or 2 by each steamer, but as a rule they did not concern matters of general interest. A little after his arrival, however, he wrote concerning an incident of his former visit, a trivial matter, but one which had annoyed him. I had been with him in Bermuda on the earlier visit, and as I remember it, there had been some slight oversight on his part in the matter of official etiquette, something which doubtless no one had noticed but himself. To A. B. Paine, in Redding: Bay House, January 11, 1910. Dear Paine, there was a military lecture last night at the officers' mess, Prospect, and as the lecturer honored me with a special and urgent invitation, and said he wanted to lecture to me particularly, I being the greatest living master of the platform art, I naturally packed Helen and her mother into the provided carriage and went. As soon as we landed at the door with the crowd, the governor came to me at once and was very cordial, and apparently as glad to see me as he said he was. So that incident is closed, and pleasantly and entirely satisfactorily. Everything is all right now, and I am no longer in a clumsy and awkward situation. I met up with that charming Colonel Chapman and other officers of the regiment, and had a good time. Commandant Peters of the Carnegie will dine here tonight and arrange a private visit for us to his ship, the crowd to be denied access. Sincerely yours, S. L. C. Helen of this letter was Mr. and Mrs. Allen's young daughter, a favorite companion of his walks and drives. Loomis and Lark, mentioned in the letters which follow, were Edward E. Loomis, his nephew by marriage, named by Mark Twain as one of the trustees of his estate, and Charles T. Lark, Mark Twain's attorney. To A. B. Paine, in Redding: Hamilton, January 21, 10. Dear Paine, thanks for your letter, and for its contenting news of the situation in that foreign and far off and vaguely remembered country where you and Loomis and Lark and other beloved friends are. I have a letter from Clara this morning. She is solicitous, and wants me well and watchfully taken care of. My, she ought to see Helen and her parents and Claude administer that trust. Also, she says, I hope to hear from you or Mr. Paine very soon. I am writing her, and I know you will respond to your part of her prayer. She is pretty desolate now, after Jean's emancipation.
the only kindness God ever did that poor, unoffending child in all her hard life. Yours ever, S.L.C. Send Clara a copy of Howells's gorgeous letter. I want a copy of my article that he is speaking of.
The gorgeous letter was concerning Mark Twain's article, "The Turning Point in My Life," which had just appeared in one of the Harper publications. Howells wrote of it, "While your wonderful words are warm in my mind yet, I want to tell you what you know already, that you never wrote anything greater, finer than that turning point paper of yours." From the early Bermuda letters we may gather that Mark Twain's days were enjoyable enough, and that his malady was not giving him serious trouble thus far. Near the end of January he wrote, "Life continues here the same as usual. There isn't a flaw in it. Good times, good home, tranquil contentment all day and every day, without a break. I shouldn't know how to go about bettering my situation." He did little in the way of literary work, probably finding neither time nor inclination for it. When he wrote at all, it was merely to set down some fanciful drolleries with no thought of publication. To Professor William Lyon Phelps, Yale College, Hamilton, March 12. Dear Professor Phelps, I thank you ever so much for the book. Footnote: Professor Phelps' Essays on Modern Novelists. End of footnote. Which I find charming, so charming indeed that I read it through in a single night, and did not regret the lost night's sleep. I am glad if I deserve what you have said about me, and even if I don't, I am proud and well contented, since you think I deserve it. Yes, I saw Professor Lounsbury, and had a most pleasant time with him. He ought to have stayed longer in this little paradise, partly for his own sake, but mainly for mine. I knew my poor Jean had written you. I shall not have so dear and sweet a secretary again. Good health to you, and all good fortune attend you. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. He would appear to have written not many letters besides those to Mrs. Gabrilowitsch and to Stormfield, but when a little girl sent him a report of a dream, inspired by reading The Prince and the Pauper, he took the time and trouble to acknowledge it, realizing, no doubt, that a line from him would give the child happiness. To Miss Sulamith, in New York: Bay House, Bermuda, March 21, 1910. Dear Miss Sulamith, I think it is a remarkable dream for a girl of 13 to have dreamed, in fact for a person of any age to have dreamed, because it moves by regular grade and sequence from the beginning to the end, which is not the habit of dreams. I think your report of it is a good piece of work, a clear and effective statement of the vision. I am glad to know you like The Prince and the Pauper so well, and I believe with you that the dream is good evidence of that liking. I think I may say, with your sister, that I like myself best when I am serious. Sincerely yours, S. L. Clemens. Through February and most of March, letters and reports from him were about the same. He had begun to plan for his return, and concerning amusements at Stormfield for the entertainment of the neighbors, and for the benefit of the library which he had founded soon after his arrival in Redding. In these letters he seldom mentioned the angina pains that had tortured him earlier, but once when he sent a small photograph of himself, it seemed to us that his face had become thin and that he had suffered. Certainly his next letter was not reassuring. To A. B. Paine, in Redding: Dear Paine, we must look into the magic lantern business. Maybe the modern lantern is too elaborate and troublesome for back settlement use, but we can inquire. We must have some kind of a show at Stormfield to entertain the countryside with.
We are booked to sail in the Bermudian April 23rd, but don't tell anybody. I don't want it known. I may have to go sooner if the pain in my breast doesn't mend its ways pretty considerably. I don't want to die here, for this is an unkind place for a person in that condition. I should have to lie in the undertaker's cellar until the ship would remove me, and it is dark down there and unpleasant. The Colliers will meet me on the pier, and I may stay with them a week or two before going home. It all depends on the breast pain. I don't want to die there. I'm growing more and more particular about the place. With love, S.L.C. This letter had been written by the hand of his secretary, Helen Allen. Writing had become an effort to him. Yet we did not suspect how rapidly the end was approaching and only grew vaguely alarmed. A week later, however, it became evident that his condition was critical. Dear Paine, I've been having a most uncomfortable time for the past 4 days with that breast pain, which turns out to be an affection of the heart, just as I originally suspected. The news from New York is to the effect that non-bronchial weather has arrived there at last. Therefore, if I can get my breast trouble in traveling condition, I may sail for home a week or two earlier than has heretofore been proposed. Yours as ever, S. L. Clemens. Per H.S.A. In this letter he seems to have forgotten that his trouble had been pronounced an affection of the heart long before he left America, though at first it had been thought that it might be gastritis. The same mail brought a letter from Mr. Allen, explaining fully the seriousness of his condition. I sailed immediately for Bermuda, arriving there on the 4th of April. He was not suffering at the moment, though the pains came now with alarming frequency and violence. He was cheerful and brave. He did not complain. He gave no suggestion of a man whose days were nearly ended. A part of the Stormfield estate had been a farm which he had given to Jean Clemens, where she had busied herself raising some livestock and poultry. After her death he had wished the place to be sold and the returns devoted to some memorial purpose. The sale had been made during the winter, and the price received had been paid in cash. I found him full of interest in all affairs and anxious to discuss the memorial plan. A day or two later he dictated the following letter, the last he would ever send. It seemed fitting that this final word from one who had so long given happiness to the whole world should record a special gift to his neighbors. To Charles T. Locke, in New York: Hamilton, Bermuda, April 6, 1910. Dear Mr. Locke, I have told Paine that I want the money derived from the sale of the farm which I had given but not conveyed to my daughter Jean to be used to erect a building for the Mark Twain Library of Redding, the building to be called the Jean L. Clemens Memorial Building. I wish to place the money, $6,000, in the hands of 3 trustees, Paine and 2 others, H. A. Lounsbury and William E. Hazen, all of Redding. These trustees to form a building committee to decide on the size and plan of the building needed, and to arrange for and supervise the work in such a manner that the fund shall amply provide for the building complete, with necessary furnishings, leaving, if possible, a balance remaining, sufficient for such repairs and additional furnishings as may be required for 2 years from the time of completion. Will you please draw a document covering these requirements, and have it ready by the time I reach New York, April 14? Very sincerely, S. L. Clemens. We sailed on the 12th of April, reaching New York on the 14th, as he had planned. A day or two later Mr. and Mrs. Gabrilowitsch, summoned from Italy by cable, arrived. He suffered very little after reaching Stormfield,
and his mind was comparatively clear up to the last day. On the afternoon of April 21st he sank into a state of coma, and just at sunset he died. 3 days later, at Elmira, New York, he was laid beside Mrs. Clemens and those others who had preceded him. The Last Day at Stormfield, by Bliss Carman. At Redding, Connecticut, the April sunrise pours over the hardwood ridges, softening and greening now in the first magic of spring. The wild cherry trees are in bloom, the bloodroot is white underfoot. The serene early light flows on, touching with glory the world, and flooding the large upper room where a sick man sleeps. Slowly he opens his eyes, after long weariness smiles, and stretches arms overhead, while those about him take heart. With his awakening strength, morning and spring in the air, the strong clean scents of earth, the call of the golden shaft ringing across the hills, he takes up his heartening book, opens the volume and reads a page of old rugged Carlyle, the dour philosopher, who looked askance upon life, lurid, ironical, grim, yet sound at the core. But weariness returns. He lays the book aside, with his glasses upon the bed, and gladly sleeps. Sleep, blessed abundant sleep, is all that he needs. And when the close of day reddens upon the hills, and washes the room with rose, in the twilight hush the summoner comes to him, ever so gently, unseen, touches him on the shoulder. And with the departing sun, our great funning friend is gone. How he has made us laugh! A whole generation of men smiled in the joy of his wit. But who knows whether he was not like those deep jesters of old, who dwelt at the courts of kings, Arthurs, Pendragons, Lears, plying the wise fool's trade, making men merry at will, hiding their deeper thoughts under a motley array, keen-eyed, serious men, watching the sorry world, the gaudy pageant of life, with pity and wisdom and love. Fearless, extravagant, wild, his caustic merciless mirth was leveled at pompous shams. Doubt not behind that mask there dwelt the soul of a man, resolute, sorrowing, sage, as sure a champion of good as ever rode forth to fray. Haply, who knows? Somewhere in Avalon, Isle of Dreams, in vast contentment at last, with every grief done away, while Chaucer and Shakespeare wait, and Molière hangs on his words, and Cervantes not far off listens and smiles apart, with that incomparable drawl, he is jesting with Dagonet now. End of Section 50. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. End of the Letters of Mark Twain complete, by Mark Twain.